and Facebook Live. So first I will provide some background on our facilitator, Judge Cordell, and then that will be followed by Chief Galea, who will do a brief overview of the police data that was released last week. Then Judge Cordell will lay out the ground rules for the town hall. And as I said before, this is a listening session for the council. We are here to listen, learn, and understand. So the chat feature is disabled for chatting, but it does have a link to the police department data for all attendees to access it. And if you would like to speak or enter written questions, you can put the written questions into the Q&A section. So Judge Cordell will go over all these details once we get started. LaDoris Hazard Cordell is a 1974 graduate of Stanford Law School, and she was the first lawyer to open a law practice in East Palo Alto, a low-income community of color. In 1978, she was appointed Assistant Dean for Student Affairs at Stanford Law School, where she implemented a successful minority admissions program. In 1982, Governor Jerry Brown appointed Ms. Cordell to the Municipal Court of Santa Clara County, and in 1988, she won election to the Superior Court of Santa Clara County, making her the first African-American woman to sit on the Superior Court in Northern California. In 2001, she retired from the bench to become Vice Provost and Special Counselor to the President for Campus Relations at Stanford University. She left that position in 2009. In 2003, accepting no monetary donations, Judge Cordell ran a grassroots campaign and won a 4-year term on the Palo Alto City Council. She was the independent police auditor for the city of San Jose for 5 years, from 2010 to 2015. Under her leadership, the office gained national prominence. In 2016, she chaired a Blue Ribbon Commission in Santa Clara County that investigated the jails in the aftermath of the murder of an inmate by jail guards. And she also served on a Blue Ribbon panel that evaluated the culture of the San Francisco Police Department after racist and sexist text messages surfaced. In 2018, Judge Cordell was the voice of opposition and campaigned vigorously against the recall of Judge Aaron Persky. She has been an on-camera legal analyst for CBS 5 television and a guest commentator on Court TV. And looking at her, it was hard to believe that she is a grandmother of 5 and a mother of 2. She lives in Palo Alto, and in her spare time is a pianist, vocalist, portrait artist, cartoonist, and currently writing a memoir about her 20 years on the bench. So we are so honored that she was able to take time out of her busy schedule to join us tonight and to help facilitate this town hall. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Chief Galea to do a brief overview of the data, and then Judge Cordell, if you would please start the town hall. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone, now 135 attendees who have called in to this Zoom meeting tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Pepper, and thank you to everyone who has joined us tonight. National and local events have obviously prompted a lot of questions about policies, our policies and procedures here in Los Altos, and we have put a lot of our information on our department webpage. In addition, we've received inquiries pertaining to complaint, arrest, and citation data that we've also, as the mayor pointed out, released last week on our webpage. We recognize that transparency is essential in maintaining trust and confidence in the partnerships in the community that we have worked hard to develop and maintain every day. So in response to the inquiries that we received, we've prepared this statistical report here for you tonight, outlining several key areas of interactions between the police department and the community that I'll briefly go over with you. The first set of numbers that we'll go over is our citation information data. And it's important to note that the information is based only on the citations issued. It does not include all the car stops or all of those stops where citations were or no citation was issued. Currently, we do not have the capacity to capture that information. I think some of you are aware that Assembly Bill 953 enacted the Racial and Identity Profiling Act in 2015, which among other things is going to require every police department in the state of California to annually report their stop data to the Attorney General. So for Los Altos, that Assembly bill will take effect in 2022. Obviously, it is a ways out, but we're currently researching the technology upgrades that will be necessary to allow the data collection. So the citation information I'm going to go over with you tonight covers the last 3 years, 2017 to 2020. So with that, I'm going to take a shot at sharing my screen. And there it is. Let's see. Okay. So what the information is that we're looking at, there's a lot of data, and the raw data is on our website. We thought it might be a little bit easier to review and digest if we were able to break it up into the pie chart that hopefully that you can all see. So for the 3-year period of the citations that we reviewed, a total of 6,602 citations were issued in that 3-year period. The citation information is broken down by race, resident, and non-resident status. So starting on the left-hand side of the pie chart, there were a total of 2,400 citations issued to white drivers, and of that 2,400 citations, 1,797 were non-residents and 603 were residents. There were a total of, or there is a total of 1,267 citations issued to Asian drivers, and of that, 968 were non-residents, 299 residents. Black drivers were issued a total of 150 citations, 134 were non-resident, 16 resident. A total of 1,384 Hispanic drivers were issued citations, and of that, 1,337 were non-residents and 47 residents. And there's a category of other. And in that category, there's a total of 1,326 citations issued, and of that, 1,023 were non-residents and 303 residents. So I'm sure some of you or many of you are asking what constitutes someone fitting into the other category. And the answer is that if you were to look at your driver's license, there is no information on there regarding race. So with that, really it's up to the officer's opinion as to what the race of an individual is, and to put on the citation, or actually to categorize the information. If an officer is not sure of the race, then he or she will utilize this other category. I'll scroll down to the arrest information. So the arrest information, again, goes to a 3-year period, 2017 to 2020. There was 575 total arrests. And of those arrests, 220 individuals were white. Of the 220, 155 were non-residents and 65 residents. There were a total of 42 Asian individuals arrested, 26 non-residents and 16 residents. A total of 48 Black individuals arrested, 44 non-resident and 4 resident. A total of 201 Hispanic individuals arrested. Of that 201, 189 were non-residents and 12 were residents. And next, I would like to make some review the information about personnel complaints that were lodged against Los Altos police officers. And this goes back to a 5-year period, and starting in 2015. And in 2015, and as you read across, there were no formal complaints issued against department members. 2016, we had 1 community-initiated complaint and 4 department-initiated complaints. And if you look to the far right, you see the disposition. 4 of those complaints were sustained and 1 was unfounded. If you're wondering what the difference is between a community-initiated versus a department-initiated, it's, as the titles would suggest, any complaint that we received from the community falls under that community initiated. And there are times where I, as the chief, will, if I receive information of potential misconduct, can initiate an investigation, and that falls under the department initiated complaints. In 2017, we had 3 community initiated complaints, 1 department initiated complaint, and the dispositions on those were 2 were unfounded, 1 was exonerated, and 1 is still pending. The pending complaint is an excessive force allegation, and it has been several years since we received this complaint, and it is still pending because the individual that filed the complaint has not made himself available to conclude the investigation. So we have reached out to him several times in hopes that we can close this investigation. In 2018, we received 2 community-initiated complaints, 1 department-initiated complaint, no use of force. And of those, 1 were sustained, 2 were unfounded. 2019, no complaints whatsoever. And our current year that we're in now, we've received 3 community-initiated complaints, no department-initiated, and the disposition on those is that we did sustain 1 of the 3 complaints, and 2 were unfounded. To give you everyone a little perspective on the number of calls for service, and then also the number of positive comments that the department receives. So we've gone through our officers' personnel files, actually every department member's personnel files for the last 5 years. And in comparison to the complaint information, there were a total of 236 commendations. And I would say the vast majority of those are letters from members of our community thanking our officers for particular service that they had conducted for them. Also, give you an idea of the number of citizen contacts, community contacts that we have calls for service. Over that 5-year period, we had just over 90,000 calls. And again, those are calls for service, car stops, and self-initiated activity. And again, in that 5-year period, we have roughly 183,000 911 7-digit emergency calls, 9 non-emergency calls coming into and coming out of the department. So this is really a snapshot, raw data of the information. Obviously, we released the information last week, and there's certainly a lot of questions that some of the numbers can answer. It really can answer really the what's, but not the whys. There's a number of factors, especially with arrest information, that factor into when an officer makes arrest or doesn't make an arrest. I think a good example is calls for service. It's not uncommon that we respond out on a theft case or a domestic violence case, and those are cases where we will make an arrest, but certainly the circumstances are dictated by calls that the officer received and not self-initiated activity. So really, I think to make any concrete conclusions from this, there clearly needs to be more analysis that we would need to do. That, Mayor, concludes the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
So this is Judge Cordell speaking. I don't know if you can take that this PowerPoint down, the slide down, because it's all I can see on my screen right now, because we're going to start
Yes.
into the meeting. Can you do that for me, Chief?
Yes, I'm going to give it my best try.
All right.
Thank you, Judge Cordell, for jumping in. I started
All right.
speaking and it's on mute, so
Go ahead.
I'll turn it over to you to lay out the ground rules for all of the 152 attendees that I currently see.
This is terrific. Thank you, Mayor Pepper. This is a remarkable time in our nation in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd that has generated a national and worldwide conversation about race and policing in America. Your city leaders here in Los Altos have tonight stepped up to join the national conversation. And I was asked by your mayor and your vice mayor to be a part of that conversation by serving as a facilitator for tonight's town hall. And I was pleased to accept because I'm very interested in your thoughts about what is happening in Los Altos and what Los Altos think about these issues. So this evening belongs to you, the attendees. It is a time for your city leaders to listen to your comments and for the 7 panelists to field your questions. It's also a time for your city leaders to get the pulse of the community about policing. Thanks to Trevor, I will be able to see your written questions and your comments, and I will read them aloud because I'll be looking over to my left occasionally because they'll be coming up on my laptop. I will read them aloud and intersperse them among your live comments and your questions, and they will be announced by John. And he will call as you all decide you want to speak live and on video or not. He will call out the first 3, and then we'll proceed from there. Democracy is a fragile and precious thing, and it works because of transparency in government and because of the social contract in which we all agree to be civil in our discourse and appreciate that we can disagree without being disagreeable. So the subject before us tonight, policing, will undoubtedly generate differences of opinion, and that's just fine. I fully expect, though, that all of us will be respectful when those opinions are expressed. Now, anyone who would like to speak will have 3 minutes to do so. And if, or less, you don't have to take the whole 3 minutes. And if you want to speak a second time, that's not a problem, but I will call on you a second time only after everyone has had a chance to be heard at least once. So with that, we are going to start our listening. I will be the timekeeper. I will occasionally look to my left because that's where my timer is. And I will, as politely as I can, let you know if you go over your 3 minutes that it's time to stop. All right, so I'm going to ask John, if he will, to ask, first of all, John, are there any people who would like to speak?
Thank you, Judge Cordell. Yes, there are several individuals who have requested to speak.
All right, so John, why don't you call out the first 3, and those people will each have 3 minutes, and then I'll look to our written questions.
Sure. So first we will have S. Banerjee, and then we will have Nancy Ellickson, and then we will have Jerry.
Good evening. This is Sandeepan Banerjee. I hope you can all hear and see me. And I'm a resident of Los Altos. Thanks to all of you for organizing this and listening. My question in the context of the report that Chief Galea has circulated is around the personnel complaints and their disposition. I note that 6 complaints were sustained, and my question is, what was the action taken against the sustained complaints? If we can get perhaps as a subsequent communication some characterization of whether those complaints were resulting in any personnel type actions. Primarily driving this question is the notion that what underlies the present conversation in the nation is perceived lack of accountability. So I would like to stress that the community sort of looks for accountability in the case of sustained complaints. A related question that I have, and I'll keep it brief, is regarding the hiring processes and the personnel processes of the department. It would help us to understand what the screening mechanisms are for personnel who might have prior incidents of similar complaints against in earlier portions of their career. So looking forward, not necessarily right now if you don't have the data, Chief Galea, but in any subsequent communication to understand the accountability in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So Chief, the first question was about discipline for the officers that had sustained complaints. What is your response?
Yes, thank you. Good question. Regarding discipline, I don't have the data in front of me. I can tell you if there's a formal investigation and it results in a sustained finding, I can't think of a scenario where there's not some form of discipline, whether it be a letter of reprimand or more severe. Obviously, it would be dictated by the allegation and things such as an officer's personnel record, prior history, years of service, and things of that nature.
The second part question, Chief, was about hiring and about looking at the background about, I guess, specifically of officers, if they had problematic backgrounds, for example. What is the process?
Yeah, thank you. And again, another good question. Hiring amongst in law enforcement is very difficult, and is becoming increasingly difficult. There is a small pool of people that could complete a successful hiring process, and unfortunately, though that pool of candidates, potential candidates, is shared by a number of law enforcement agencies. Typically, an individual will apply to several police agencies, and every chief is competing for that highly qualified individual. But The testing, the interview process is very rigorous. We typically will have an individual go to 2 or 3 interview processes and before going on into what we call the background process. And the background process is, and it'll take several months, and it is very comprehensive. We will go back, look at school records far back as far as high school. We will check with family members. We'll check with spouses. Obviously, we'll check criminal history. We'll check prior employers. We'll check neighbors to see really the character of the individual that we're potentially looking at. If that individual is successful to that point, we will conduct a psychological examination where we send him or her to a psychologist for a battery of written and tests and an interview, which typically takes the bulk of a day. And based on that, I get a recommendation and as far as the suitability of an individual potentially coming to work at a police department. As far as I'm sorry, the last point I will make to you, I can't think of a police chief, at least in Northern California, and I would probably say most of California, that would take a chance on somebody that might have an issue in his background. And to your point, someone that has sustained complaints or works or had worked at another police agency, had been either fired or significant or really any disciplinary action. It is competitive, but my position is why take that risk?
Thank you, Chief. Next up is Nancy.
Hi, this is Nancy Ellickson. In looking at the data, and I read the town crier data and the data that the chief just presented, there's certain information that just isn't there, and I know that it's not collected. But with the information that is collected, is it reliable enough to draw conclusions from and make recommendations from?
Yeah.
Back to you, Chief.
Yeah, thank you. And again, a good question. And I tried to address that briefly. Certainly I can just give you my opinion regarding the citation information. I think it's hard to draw just conclusions based on the numbers themselves. I think what everyone needs to ask themselves is, what are we comparing the data to? Are we comparing it to the demographics of Los Altos? Are we talking about the driving population here in the city? Or are we comparing it to the driving demographics of people in Santa Clara County and the people that are actually driving through Los Altos every day? I think everyone's aware that we sit between a number of larger communities. We have people that come to work here, that they drive through, coming down 280, dropping off children at schools. So until I think you can identify as far as citations what that baseline is, it's really hard to draw any conclusion. With regarding to arrests, and that was the point I made earlier, yeah, you have the numbers, but really without doing some substantial analysis of what really caused the arrest to be made. Was it a self-initiated arrest by an officer, or was it a call for service? I would say a significant number of our arrests are as a result of complaints or calls to the police department. So without that analysis, it's really hard to draw substantial conclusions.
So I want to let our panelists know we have at least 30 questions in the Q&A already. So unless we want to be here all night, I'm going to just ask you when you are responding, and no disrespect, Chief, your answer needed to be as it was, given what the questions have been. But keep in mind, some brevity would be helpful so we can make sure everybody gets heard. And it is the intention of us, we're going to stay here till everybody gets heard. That's the whole idea. So let's just keep moving along. I'm going to now go to the first questions that have come in, and I'm taking them in order. This one is directed to Chris Jordan, the city manager. How are we supposed to trust Chris Jordan, who will no doubt have a hand to play in any sort of police reform in his role as city manager, to be a fair arbiter of change when he, as city manager, took no action to remove a corrupt and abusive police chief from the town he previously served as city manager? Chris. Do you want to respond at all, Chris? Chris, I'm not.
Thank you, Judge Cordell, and thank you for that question. My wife, sure, and I'm sorry.
I think you're freezing up.
Can you hear
here.
me? My Wi-Fi, I think, is going in and out a little bit.
Yeah, you're freezing up a little.
But yeah, I'd like to answer that question. Thank you for that question. For those of you who may not be aware, there's been a really ugly incident involving a, oh, am I? Okay. Let me get back. Let me go get out. I'll get back in, and I'm happy to answer that question. So
we'll
let me try to do that. Maybe take another question and then come back.
That's fine. That's fine. No problem. So we'll come back. Next question. I'm going to take three, and then we'll go back to our people. The second one, I think it would be helpful to know the breakdown of races in Los Altos to compare to the police data. So I don't know, Chief, if you have it, or maybe the mayor has it. Do you know what the racial breakdown in population is in Los Altos?
I do not have it in front of me, no.
Does anyone who's on our panel know the breakdown of population?
I have it, Judge Cordell.
Yes, the Vice Mayor?
Yes, this is Mayor Jan Pepper. Can you hear me?
Hey, Mayor. Yes, okay. I can.
Our population is approximately 31,000. We have about 25% Asian in our population, 0.4% African American, which consists of about 140 families. We have a high percentage of East Asian. I don't have a percentage for that, and I don't have the percentage of white residents.
Okay. All right, and I'll go to one more question that's written here. As a formal Los Altos High School student, former, I guess, I feel passionately that the school should not have school resource officers. I have never heard of a positive experience with SROs, school resource officers, on our campus, nor have I ever seen them intervene in any of the very infrequent altercations on campus. With the Los Altos Police Department a block away, it feels completely unnecessary to have cops on campus actively patrolling and policing children. SROs make students feel uneasy and surveilled at a place where they should feel safe to learn and grow. And council must discuss whether they have any place on campus. Does anyone want to comment on this? It's not a question, it is an observation, a very good one. And does anyone want to comment? And if so, just speak up. Okay, not hearing anybody.
I would be happy just to add some perspective, Judge, to
Go right ahead, Chief.
Conversation. And I know this is part of a larger dialogue nationwide as far as the role of SROs, and many jurisdictions have a lot of SROs. We have one SRO in Los Altos. That one SRO serves approximately 16 public and private schools. Our SRO teaches a DARE program in several schools. They work with parent-teacher groups. They work with school boards and conduct a variety of really services to the schools and the greater community. So I receive a lot of positive comments regarding our SRO. I've had a request for actually more on campus than we do. But I don't want people to have the impressions that we're actively just patrolling the hallways of schools, because that's exactly not what is taking place.
Okay, thank you, Chief. All right, I'm going to go back to John, the next three people.
Okay, the next three individuals are Moira Wang, Marianne Hawks, and Ishan Parmar.
All right, we'll start with Moira.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for your time. My name is Moira. I've grown up in Los Altos and I'm back in town after graduating from college in May. I have 4 specific points I'll be talking about tonight. I also just want to say that I'm generally in support of Justice Vanguard, who will be speaking later, but these positions are my own. My first point is a call for even more transparency for the police department. Thank you to Police Chief Galea and the City Manager, Chris Jordan, for putting together the PDF. It was a helpful and important first step. However, there needs to be even more transparency. For example, SB 1421 requires the release of police records if the records involve certain criteria such as serious use of force. However, the PDF released by LAPD only lists quote-unquote use of force complaints, which makes it impossible for residents to hold officers properly accountable and to demand release of records in the correct situations. Another point for more transparency is that there should be records of the racial breakdown of stops too, not just of arrests and citations. Additionally, it'd be helpful to get a breakdown of the exact categories of 911 calls so we can understand what proportion of 911 calls are non-emergency. Which leads me to my second point, which is to shift non-emergency calls away from police. There are prior models such as Cahoots that have been proven to be effective and have saved the city money. Police Chief Galea mentioned in his interview with the town crier that he is not sure what this model would look like exactly for Los Altos, but also mentioned the possibility of having mental health calls be redirected in North County. This program would be of similar size to Cahoots, and although I understand that the police chief expressed that he is not sure how exactly Los Altos would fit into such a program, I think this is a really important area for the police department and council to do its own research into. There are already many cities with similar programs, and SF is also starting to build its own. It's time for Los Altos to take responsibility of its own city and to take action. My third point is the formation of a commission that be specifically composed of people most affected by policing with the power to A, fire officers that have complaints of misconduct and oversee hiring of new officers.
Okay, I think the person has cut out. I'm not sure what happened. So we got at least 3 of her points, Maura. So we're going to go on to our next person. And if Maura comes back in, I'll certainly let her in to finish. Who's next up?
This is
Kelly. Marianne Hawks.
This is Kelly Hawks.
Okay.
So Marianne and I are residents of Los Altos. We're using Marianne's computer. And I was thinking about the needs of the residents of Los Altos. And one of the needs I think that we could all agree upon is that we want our property protected. And that means that we want our homes and businesses not looted nor vandalized. This would permit residents to remain in their homes and not move away from this community. This would also permit others to have an interest in living in Los Altos, where they would like to buy or rent an apartment. And homes and businesses would thereby retain their property values. Another need is that the residents, whether they own or rent, want to feel safe and be safe. And this is achieved by having a low crime rate. And that is achieved by criminals perceiving that they would be arrested for unlawful acts. And that implies an adequate number of police officers. And so I think the legacy of this city council could be that by making decisions, you can protect property and permit homeowners and business owners to retain their value, and also that the residents would feel safe. So I hope that's the legacy of the city council. That's all I had to share with you tonight.
Thank you, Kelly and Marianne. And our next speaker.
Oh, that's me. My name is Ishan. I'm a longtime resident of Los Altos. I've been here since I was 7 years old. The first thing I want to do is respond to the gentleman that just spoke. to be completely honest, the reason that Los Altos is a low crime city is not because the police department is snuffing out crime every day. On average, if you do the math, they respond to 1 crime a day. Let's be frank, the reason that Los Altos is a low crime city is because Los Altos is an extremely wealthy city. You can see this across the country. Wealthy towns all across the country don't face the same level of policing, not because the police department is snuffing out crime, but it's because these towns are very wealthy and they have very wealthy people living in them. The second thing is that Chief Galea said that he doesn't believe any department, any police chief in Northern California would hire a officer that would be a danger to the community. I would urge him to look at the city of San Jose. There's lots of video from the police of San Jose during the protests recently of police officers instigating and trying to pick fights with protesters. But what I really want to talk about is, my question really is for City Manager Chris Jordan. I recently read an article from the West Linn Tidings, which is a local newspaper in West Linn, Oregon, where Mr. Jordan was the city manager before coming to Los Altos. The article details how the ex-police chief in West Linn is now under federal investigation for allegations of sexist and racist misconduct as a police chief in a different town. The police chief's name is Terry Timius, and Mr. Jordan hired Mr. Timius without doing a background check. A background check that would have exposed all of Mr. Timius's previous misconduct. This is according to a different newspaper called the Oregonian. Even after the city of West Linn hired an outside investigator, who was a former police chief himself, no less, to compile a report about Mr. Timius's previous misconduct, Mr. Jordan refused to read such a report, barring the public from ever seeing it, because since no one else read it, it was protected under attorney-client privilege. This report has been recently released to the residents of that town in Oregon. I'm going to read a quote from the article in the West Linn Tidings. Quote, "The city actually had never performed any background investigation, comprehensive or not, before hiring Timius," end quote. So the worst part of this to me is that Mr. Jordan played a large role in preventing this report about this dirty cop he hired to be police chief from reaching the public. The city manager has a great role in determining the budgets and personnel in a city. So how will Mr. Jordan build a level of trust that he is committed to true police reform in Los Altos when in his previous job, he hired and then failed to even read a report about a corrupt police chief in his town? Thank you for your time.
I'm not sure that this requires any kind of comment right now. And I don't know, is Chris Jordan back in?
I am back in. Can you hear me now?
Okay, yes, I can. So Chris, what I'm going to do, because not all of these have to be responded to, but there was a first question put out to you that you didn't get a chance to answer. And this last of the second group of 3 touches on the same subject. If you want to comment, that's fine. And if you do, again, keep in mind, we have now almost 40 questions to go.
Thank you, Judge, and I will try to be brief with this. First of all, there was an incident in West Linn about 2 years ago in which clearly race played a role in an investigation. And that was it's awful. It's disgusting when I read about it. It did not happen while I was there. It would not have been tolerated at all while I was there. As a matter of fact, I have a history of removing several police officers for less egregious, inappropriate behavior. And those officers under Oregon law were in fact decertified by the state after I removed them from their position. So in fact, we have done those things. I don't know where the story is coming from that a background check was not conducted on the police chief when he was hired. That is not true. This idea that I did not read an investigation is not true. I don't know who is stating that, but that is absolutely false. The decisions regarding the police chief at the time were made based upon the investigation that was conducted and the advice that I received from our attorney at the time. And that also included whether or not the report could be made public, because under Oregon law, there are several different laws that are not necessarily the same as in California regarding investigations of police officers and discipline regarding police officers. So I was not actually able, if I recall correctly, to even release that information at the time. So that's kind of what transpired. And in terms of the previous question regarding what we're going to do in the future, I look forward to this. I think this is an exciting opportunity to take a look at how we conduct police services and what opportunities there are to do things differently. I've always believed that the police aren't just there to investigate and arrest people, but to actually add to the livability of the community. I think this is a great opportunity to hear from the community and see what we can do to change how we offer policing services that best serve the community. So I'll stop right there to try to keep it brief. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you so much. We're going to go now to the next 3 questions in the order in which they've been submitted. Given the fact that the data doesn't provide certain information, is it reliable enough to draw significant conclusions? Chief, do you want to respond briefly?
Yeah, I think I touched on that a little
think you
bit
did.
earlier. Yeah, so
I think you already did.
It is really tough.
Next question, can we please also get data on police stops, not just citations and arrests?
Yes, and I had referenced that earlier also. We're required to start the reporting in 2022 or the collection of data in 2022. Unfortunately, there's a lot of data that's going to be required to be collected. We do not currently have the technology to do that, but we're exploring ways to do it in advance of the requirement.
Thank you. And just so people know, the AB 953 requires that for every stop, be it a pedestrian stop or a traffic stop, the person stopped must be identified by race, by age, by gender. The data must include why the person was stopped, whether or not the person was searched, whether or not the person, if it's a traffic stop, was ordered out of the car, and why, whether or not any evidence was turned up as a result of the search, and what was the final disposition of the stop. So that has to be done for every single stop, pedestrian and traffic stop, by every law enforcement agency in California. And all the data is then reported to the state attorney general, and that office is required to make a report once a year with all of that data for all law enforcement agencies in the country so that everyone can see all of the data. All right, we'll now go to one last question. Number third one here is, what is the Los Altos process for handling complaints? How does citizen oversight play in this process? It kind of makes this question has an assumption that there is some sort of citizen or civilian oversight in Los Altos. So Chief, do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, we have our complaint process is outlined on our website where people anyone can file a complaint, formal complaint, and once the complaint is received, we do assign it to typically a supervisor for a low level type complaint. We've had a number of occasions where I think the complaints require maybe an individual that maybe could be a little more independent, and certainly we want to give that appearance that when people do make complaints, and if there's significant complaints, if we don't feel that we can handle them internally here, we'll assign them out, and we've done that a number of times. Once the complaint disposition is received, it does come to me, and typically if there is whatever the disposition is, that disposition is forwarded to the city manager.
Right.
And
so
obviously, I'm sorry,
no, go right ahead, Chief.
If it's a situation, as you saw in our data, where it's a sustained complaint, I'll work with our city attorneys and our HR department to follow through with whatever discipline is recommended.
Thank you, Chief. So I just want to make clear that there is no independent civilian oversight in Los Altos. There is, for example, in San Jose, where I was the independent police auditor. So when complaints come in, they are investigated by your internal affairs unit, and then whatever their investigation shows, that unit makes a finding, and then that determination, if the officer has engaged in bad behavior, goes to you, Chief, and you make a decision about what happens in terms of discipline. We're going to go to the next 3 people. John, who are they?
Before we do that, Judge, it looks like Moira is back online.
Oh, good. All right.
Would you like to bring her back?
We will take Moira, but can you tell me who the next 3 are? So we can have them ready to go.
Sure. Sure. After Moira, it will be Yash, Seth Donnelly, and then Susan Russell.
All right, so Maura, are you back?
Yes, I'm back. I'm so sorry.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's
Thank
all
you
right.
for
And
taking me
Maura,
again.
you can slow it down, take your time. And I think you were either finishing up your third point or just starting your fourth.
Okay. I'll just start over at the top of my third point then.
Sure,
So my
go
third
right ahead.
point is, thank you. So my third point is the formation of a commission that would specifically be composed of people most affected by policing with the power to A, fire police officers that have complaints of misconduct and oversee hiring of new officers, and B, the ability to investigate complaints of police misconduct. It is crucial that this board have meaningful power rather than just be limited to making recommendations. I know this council likes to hear of other cities who have established precedents, so some cities who have boards with such power include Oakland, SF, and Newark. Newark in New Jersey has the power to issue subpoenas to ensure that discipline sticks, and it has the power to audit the police department's policies and practices. 7 of the 11 members of the board are nominated by community and civil rights organizations instead of the mayor or police chief. My fourth point is that additionally, this board should have input in the union negotiations with the police. Police unions are able to protect officers with records of misconduct charges and destroy said records. There's a fine line between a union ensuring its members are fairly employed and preventing union members from being held accountable. In an ideal world, I'd like for the union contracts to be rewritten to be 3 parties of the city, union, and members of the civilian commission. That being said, I understand that currently this contract is written between the 2 parties of the city and the union. Given that the city is supposed to represent its residents, I am asking that the city listen to a board such as the one that I'm suggesting when it comes to union negotiations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Maura. So Maura, now we'll go to next person, Yash.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
I'm curious about who are you guys getting this information from that like the SROs on campus? Because my group, Justice Vanguard, has been getting plenty of testimonial and have been doing surveys of our own, and they do nothing but harass and make students feel unsafe, the minority students at least. So I want to know who's saying they actually like them on campus. And I have a sneaking suspicion the reason why they like them on campus is the same reason why Black people are not even 1% of the town, but we make up 11% of your arrests, and why that guy probably feels so safe calling in people like me to your department to make his property feel safe. So who is liking these SROs? Who are you getting this information from? Because it's definitely not the minorities of your town.
Thank you, Yash. And Chief, do you want to respond to that?
I'm not really clear what the question was. If you could help me with that, I'd be happy to respond.
You said,
go ahead, Yash. Go right ahead.
You said people like the SROs on campus. I want to know who are you asking this to? Because it's definitely not us.
Yeah, this is the feedback that I get when I go on campus. Every year I attend a number of DARE graduations where I interact with students and parents. I interact with school superintendents. I interact with our school administrators.
We're going to move on. Thank you, Yash. Seth, you're up next.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Go right ahead, Seth.
Okay, hi. My name is Seth Donnelly. I'm a high school teacher at Los Altos. I've been working in the district for about 20 years. And I can definitely reinforce what Yoshi or Kiyoshi just said, that in my extensive interaction with students, particularly students of color, and even staff, they have felt very uncomfortable and profiled and subjected to mistreatment by SROs. That does not mean, of course, that every individual SRO is a bad person, but what it means is the institution of the police on the school campus is creating an intolerable atmosphere that is not safe for Black students in particular, and even Black staff. I have a colleague, a teacher, who identified herself to the police as a teacher, a Black woman, and she was threatened with being thrown to the ground. Right, so there is a movement across the country right now to get SROs and to militarize and get the police off campus. And I think it's very important that Los Altos exercise some progressive leadership in this manner. The other thing I wanted to point out is that the chief's arrest data shows that we know that Black people are about 0.4% of the population in Los Altos, but they're more than 11% of the arrests by Los Altos police. Now, even if we look at the broader region, Black people might be 1 or 2% of the broader population in the peninsula, and yet they're still being arrested 11 times greater their numbers. White people are 70% of Los Altos population, but they're about 38% of arrests. So there's something off even on the arrest data that would require, and we don't even have the stop data yet. So I think that's very important, and it also speaks to the need to have true independent civilian control of the police, not just a complaint mechanism built into the police department itself.
Thank you, Seth. We'll go to Susan.
So I didn't know what Seth was going to say, but I agree completely with what he said. The town crier, I thought, did a good job of pointing out the percentage of the different races in Los Altos. And any way you look at it, the statistics are appalling, both in terms of the residents and especially in terms of the non-residents who are either arrested or cited, and we don't even know about the stops. And I would like to say, in terms of stops, as a white person who's lived here for more than 40 years, I've never been stopped. I don't think I've been a perfect driver. My husband was stopped once, and when he told them, the police, he was a resident, they said, "Oh, that's fine, just be a little bit more careful." When our children were growing up here in high school, their Black and Hispanic friends were often stopped, and they were never stopped because, of course, they were white. And I also wanted to just ask, I'm talking to my kids who now live in Louisiana and Texas, it actually shows on your driver's license because of voting rights laws what your race is, and it doesn't show for us, but I'm just sort of puzzled both by the big category of other, and I'm wondering, like with AB 953, which the sooner the better that is enforced and that Los Altos follows that would be good, but how do the police know? Are they then entitled to ask for your race under 953 and now they're not?
Yeah,
Okay.
my understanding under 953 is that the officer is to put down the perceived race, and if he's not sure, then use the other category.
I do want to add that with 953, this legislation allows the larger police departments have to get in first, and that's why Los Altos, because of its size, does not have to give its data until 2022. So we're going to go on to some questions that have come in through the Q&A that are written. One is a comment. It is very misleading to represent the data like this. The data should be shown relative to the racial makeup of Los Altos and surrounding cities. There is a question, how do these statistics compare against our demographics? And another, do you have a copy of this data normalized for differences in population? So those are all coming around the same issue. I don't know that there's any answers to these. They're just raising some issues or some questions that need to be looked into. The chief indicated we can't really come to conclusions yet, but people are now saying they need more information, particularly about the population and how it compares. Final question, not final, but the third one. I am interested in knowing how many citations were used to raise revenue, which disproportionately hurts the poor. Is the city looking into allowing people to do community service to pay fines for non-dangerous offenses like a parking violation, public intoxication, etc.? Are we treating drug users as criminals or people who need help? Anyone want to respond to that? If not, I'm going to move on and ask John to give us the next three people.
So next we have Gita Deo, Roberta, and then Shobana Raghupathy.
All right, Gita, you're up now. And welcome.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, Gita, you're up. Go right ahead.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for taking your time out to hear out each individual, including myself. My name is Gita Dale. I'm a resident of East Palo Alto, and I'm in support of Justice Vanguard's demands in regards to policing in Los Altos as well. We would like for Los Altos to declare themselves as a sanctuary city. The city of East Palo Alto has many undocumented residents, and if we get Los Altos as a sanctuary neighboring city, that is another place that undocumented people can feel safer to travel to. People from East Palo Alto constantly go to Los Altos to support their local businesses because of the convenience in nearby travel, as we don't have certain resources. Even though Santa Clara County has declared itself a sanctuary county, it is important that Los Altos goes further in taking steps to ensure that sanctuary policies are in place at a city level. Los Altos police should not act with ICE. We want the police to review all procedures to make sure we see all actions regarding ending ICE involvement in the Los Altos community. We need the police to stop entering information into databases that ICE can access, so it makes it easier to track someone who is undocumented. It would be awesome to see the transparency of legalities and logistics involved. Many people who have been ticketed and arrested in Los Altos were non-residents, which also I feel like makes it easier to target people of color outside of their community who may or may not be undocumented people. And yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Gita. Next, Roberta.
Hi, this is Roberta Phillips. Can you hear me?
Go right ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to say that, the murder of George Floyd was obviously something that was very horrendous and horrible. And it is good that our city has now, gotten together and is having a conversation, which I think is very important because it's made a lot of us look at ourselves and our actions and what we can do as individuals to be better citizens and neighbors. I also want to say that, I've interacted with Andy Galea, our police chief, and he's really been terrific. I live on San Antonio Road, and several years ago, I went to him and said, we have a lot of speeding cars on San Antonio Road. Our mailboxes have been hit by cars and knocked over. And he came up with a solution that he was going to put, speed radar equipment on San Antonio Road 6 times a year. And of course, this is to protect our kids who go to the Tiny Tots, who go to the BCS school, who go to the junior high school, the high school bus stop is also on San Antonio Road. So he really did take action, and the speed radars collect the data, and he was able to use that to allocate more police services to the area. So I just wanted to say, I know we have got, growth that we can all do and do better, but I did want to compliment our police department, because when I was, I didn't do it as an organization, I did it as an individual to protect our children when they're going to school, riding their bikes, walking, and the police were very responsive, did come up with solutions, and I just want to thank them for being a really good police department here. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. Next is Sharana.
Hi, Shobana. Hello, can you hear me?
Go right ahead, please.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
Well, I was actually a little concerned with the spate of, what I perceive as a rise in crime in Los Altos. But before I get in, I really want to give a shout out to our police. I'm a person of color, and my interaction with the Los Altos police has been fantastic. They have stopped me when I was speeding, but they have also been very lenient with, little stuff. And I know some of my friends, one of whose moms had Alzheimer's and she got lost, and the police actually did a great job in finding her back. And so it's not just citations and speeding tickets and other things that they do. They really look out for the community, and I am really grateful to them. I actually wanted to turn my attention to what I think is rising crime in Los Altos. I mean, every day I seem to be reading about, these are petty thefts. These are not major thefts, but there's always car break-ins and there's always somebody's house being ransacked. And I would actually like to see more police patrolling and for the police to actually do something on this front. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go now to some of the written Q&A. What was the disciplinary action taken when a complaint was sustained? Chief?
It obviously would depend on the complaint, the severity of the complaint, and of course the personnel file of the officer or officers involved.
Next is a compliment. Ruth Darlene here, ED of Women's Silicon Valley, a local domestic violence nonprofit. Just wanted to express my deep appreciation for the work and dedication of the Los Altos Police Department. They have been incredibly supportive of our domestic violence survivors and have devoted countless hours to helping them do high-level safety planning. Thank you to everyone and the dedicated officers who put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe. And our third, who reviews and decides the disposition of these complaints? Chief?
The review is made through what we refer to as a chain of command. It comes to me with typically a recommendation, and then ultimately, especially in the case of a sustained complaint, I'll work with our HR, city manager, and labor attorneys.
Okay, John, the next three people.
Okay, next three are Max A, Renee Rashid, and Suzanne.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead and welcome.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, my Zoom name is a little different, but my name is Maya Acharya, and I'm a lifelong resident of Los Altos, a graduate of Los Altos High School and Stanford University. I just graduated, and I'm here as a part of Justice Vanguard, and I want to speak on behalf of our demands. And first, I want to just speak on a couple things that came up for me based on some of the previous comments. Growing up in Los Altos, especially as a queer person and a person of color, police have not made me feel safe. The people who have made me feel safe have been, close friends, other people of color, other queer folks. And I want to say, as a South Asian person, and also as someone who myself is a survivor of intimate partner violence, and who has worked at a nonprofit that supports South Asian survivors of intimate partner violence in the Bay Area, in my own experience and in that work, I have seen the way that that police involvement in domestic violence situations creates barriers for especially immigrant women of color who might have language barriers. For example, a lot of support that can be made available to domestic violence survivors when we have the system that requires police interaction and requires police reports to be part of that process. So for example, let's say I'm an immigrant woman and I'm here on my spouse's visa and my spouse is abusing me. In order for me to get protection, for me to leave my spouse and not be deported, I need to have a police report. And this is just one of many examples of how policing being part of our support for domestic violence survivors is actually a negative thing. So I just wanted to add that perspective in real quick. Going back to Justice Vanguard demands that I wanted to talk about, we are very much against the civilian task force that the council and particularly our mayor and vice mayor proposed around a month ago. We found that to be very toothless and didn't actually give civilians the right to hold our policing forces accountable in meaningful ways. What we want to see instead is a community control board. And so what this would be is a board of folks who are most impacted by policing and negatively impacted by policing in our community. So especially Black folks, other people of color, queer and trans people in our communities. And like another person who spoke said before, our community is not just people who live here, but people who work here, go to school here, come through here. And this council must have the power to fire police officers based on either complaints or records that show racial discrimination, as we see overall is very prevalent in our police department. And this council must have a strong seat at the table during union negotiations, because I want to echo other people, and I don't have confidence that Chris Jordan will represent our needs in this union negotiation process. And we know that the next round of negotiations is coming up. I think you all have said that it will start by September. So we would really, it would be a very great surge of confidence for our citizens if we are actually able to meaningfully have a role in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Next, Renee.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Renee Rashid. I'm a Los Altos resident and a parent of 2 students at Los Altos High School. I'm speaking today to voice my support with Justice Vanguard's points in general, but in particular to support removing SROs from Los Altos High School and indeed all of the MVLA High School District. After doing quite a bit of research on SROs, I found out for myself the racist history of school policing that goes back to the 1950s when the NYC Council proposed placing a police officer in every school due to, I quote, dangerous delinquents and undesirables, end quote, referring to Black and Latino students who would, quote, corrode school morale, end quote. Since then, SROs have been at the center of creating a school-to-prison pipeline that has disproportionately affected Black students. Black students have a whopping 23% overrepresentation just in school suspensions based on 2013 data. And I know that's from across the country and not just Los Altos, but it is extremely concerning. The increase in the presence of law enforcement in schools, especially in the form of SROs, has coincided with increases in referrals to the justice system, especially for minor offenses. Instead of investing in SROs and relying on arrests to address student discipline, we should be using the alternatives that many reports recommend, namely implementing one of many alternatives, including restorative justice or positive behavioral interventions and supports, social and emotional learning, or behavioral monitoring and reinforcement programs in our schools. I think those are all valid options to replace SROs. I would like you to stop funding for SROs in Los Altos and keep them out of Mountain View High School as well, and instead use that money to implement one or more of the alternative methods of intervention so that we will not treat our students as criminals and ensure that school remains equitable for all our students. And if I have a few more seconds, I had 2 specific questions for Chief Galea after his presentation. The first would be, do you have any data on arrests and citations at school specifically, also broken down by race and grade and offense type? And then the second would be, you talked about the difficulty in getting good hiring into the police department. Can you say what percentage of applicants get hired to the PD?
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Renee. Chief?
Thank you. Yeah, 2 good questions. I unfortunately do not have any of the statistical information on citations and arrests at schools. In terms of the number of people that apply that are actually hired, I would say well under 10, maybe, 20, maybe 10%. And I think there's a variety of reasons. Some may get hired by other agencies, some may lose disinterest, but we just get a lot of people that get disqualified in the process.
Okay. Our next speaker is Suzanne.
So Judge Cordell, it looks like Suzanne is using an older version of Zoom, so I need to promote her to a panelist. So
Okay.
Suzanne, you'll be promoted. You'll briefly leave the meeting and then come back in as a panelist and should be able to speak then.
All right. Do you know how long that'll take, John?
No time at all.
All right. So I'll wait. And
Suzanne.
is Suzanne with us now?
Yeah, I'm right here.
All right, Suzanne, go ahead. You have 3 minutes, and welcome.
Okay, so hi, I'm Suzanne Guo, a resident of Los Altos, and I'm with Justice Vanguard. I want to draw attention to alternatives to policing, especially because maintaining police respondents for mental health crisis calls is both counterproductive and actively harmful to the cases. For example, during one of my own crises, I had called my therapist, and she told me that her only option at that moment was to call cops on me. The fear of her doing so only pushed me closer to the edge and endangered my situation. While I was lucky to recover on my own that night, who knows that in another place, in another time, I would have been pushed past my capacity. It is blatantly obvious through my own and others' experiences that the police should not be responding to mental health crises and should only be a last resort. Alternatively, there are at least 2 existing crisis teams for youth that respond in the county and would be a more effective and safer solution: the Uplift Mobile Crisis Team and the SOS, Status Offender Services Mobile Crisis Triage. We are currently looking deeper into these 2 services in terms of their methods of response, but it could be a possibility that would better attend to mental health crisis calls. I also want to talk about the lack of long-term mental health treatment for those, especially youth, who are in dire need of emotional support. Currently, community mental health agencies struggle to meet these demands due to understaffing. I will link an article by the Mountain View Voice now. I'll just put it in the chat. That outlines these issues specifically. At my high school, LEHS, students are often put on a waitlist for school-based therapy. While the therapists are often overworked and face burnout, not only students, but the community also desperately need more mental health workers, especially Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer, trans, and trauma-sensitive therapists and responders. Examples of specific community-led agencies include CHAC, Community Health Awareness Council in Mountain View, CHC, Children's Health Associates, and CASI, Counseling and Support Services for Youth. We demand that you address this blatant issue and redirect funding towards these agencies while also preserving the existing financial systems of those nonprofit agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm going to turn now to some Q&A that have been submitted. One is submitted was identical to one asked by Renee, and that was about arrest citations at schools. So I'll go to the next 3. What is the procedure for the Los Altos Police Department evaluating whether complaints are substantiated?
Well, if I understand the question right, it would be the investigation itself. It's a fairly thorough, what I would like to think is a thorough investigation. We rely on witnesses. We rely on whatever physical evidence that there might be. And probably one of the best things that we have in this agency, as a lot of agencies in the US now, are relying on body-worn camera video. It's pretty independent and doesn't give the complete story, but certainly can identify what was said and how it was said.
Thank you, Chief. Second question is for me. Is Judge Cordell being paid to be a facilitator? The answer is yes. And this is a public entity. I will submit an invoice and any member of the public can see the invoice and see exactly what I'm being paid. Next, what commitments has Los Altos made so far? I'm assuming because we're talking about policing, it's about commitments regarding, I guess, policing or Black Lives Matters. I'm not quite sure. Does anyone have any comment they want to make at all? Okay, I'm going to go to one more question. What is the impact of a sustained personnel complaint? Do some require change in department policies or retraining? Permanent marks on an officer's record? Chief?
Yeah, well, as far as department policy, there's probably not a month that goes by that there isn't some issue, some court decision, something that we become aware of, maybe an incident in a neighboring or another police department. So we're constantly evaluating our department policies. And I apologize. Could you repeat the first part of the question, Judge?
What is the impact of a sustained personnel complaint? Do some require change in department policies or retraining or permanent marks on officers' record?
Yeah, and again, it goes to the allegation. There are some complaints. It's not uncommon that we'll have a rude conduct complaint or something along those lines, and those typically are lower level, and it will typically involve training, counseling, and in the case of perhaps repeat violations, some more formalized discipline. There are some complaints that are fatal that I consider to an individual's career, and that I would certainly recommend and pursue termination.
Thank you. I'm going to keep everyone posted. We're almost up to 50 questions total, not just in addition, just total of 50. I'm going to also go back to the question that I asked earlier. What commitments has Los Altos made so far? If the person who submitted that would like to clarify that, be a little more specific, I'm very glad to ask the question again. All right, let's, John, go to the next three people, please.
So next we'll have Yiran, and then Anthony, and then Celine.
All right, Yiran, go right ahead and welcome.
Hi, my name is Yuran Liu, and I'm a resident of Los Altos and a member of Justice Vanguard. I want to reiterate our demand for a community control board that is composed of community members who are most harmed by policing, and that has the power to hire and fire police, to participate in determining the police budget, and to be an equal arbiter with veto power in negotiations of the city's contract with the Los Altos Peace Officers Association. I want to emphasize that we are not calling for a task force or a civilian review board that can only review and make recommendations regarding policing. Such a task force or review board would have no true power or influence in truly transforming policing in Los Altos. These civilian review boards that have existed across the country for many, many decades have had essentially no effect on truly holding police accountable for any misconduct or violent behavior. I also want to comment on the current Memorandum of Understanding between the City of Los Altos and the Los Altos Peace Officers Association. The current contract is abysmal. It has absolutely no mention of how civilian contracts or cases of officer misconduct are handled. It has absolutely no mention of any form of disciplinary procedures. It has absolutely no mention of civilian oversight or control. It enables Los Altos police to completely evade accountability for their actions. If my friend were to be harassed or assaulted tomorrow, or even worse, killed by a Los Altos police officer, there would be no path to accountability or consequences for that officer as a result of their actions. Also, currently, the union contract pays 5% bonus to school resource officers, which we have heard over and over again on this call, harm both students and staff in our local high schools. It also pays these 5% bonuses to those who are in hostage negotiations or SWAT teams, further supporting the militarization of our cities. So in summary, I again reiterate the demand for a community control board that has the power to hire and fire, to determine the police budget, and be an equal arbiter in the union contract. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuran. Anthony, you're next.
Hello. My name is Anthony, and I've been a longtime resident of Los Altos, where I went to school at Oak Elementary, Block Intermediate, and Mountain View High, where I graduated in 2016. I'm a recent graduate of UC Berkeley, and in general, I'm speaking tonight in support of Justice Vanguard, but my points are specific to school policing. So recent data from the US Census and the Los Altos Police Department shows that Los Altos police arrest Black residents at 10 times the rate of white residents, and that Los Altos police hand out citations to Black residents at 4 times the rate of white residents. For a community that values an education that emphasizes diversity and social justice, I know this to be true because of the learning that I've done with classmates at Los Altos schools. This is unacceptable. I'd like to talk about the use of school resource officers and the DARE curriculum, because out of all the policy changes that have been proposed, those focused on removing harmful parts of our education system resonate the most with me, because I recognize how much my education in Los Altos affected who I am today. So I ultimately want everyone to have the same good experience that I had. School resource officers, or SROs, are problematic because multiple analyses and studies have demonstrated that an officer presence in schools lead to harsher punishment for students of color and those with disabilities. Moreover, by criminalizing children at a young age, SROs reinforce the school-to-prison pipeline, leading to lifelong cycles of poverty and incarceration. This does not mean abandoning discipline or school safety, but just approaching them through a different lens. We want to invest in education and success rather than enforcement, so I support removing SROs. DARE, or the Drug Abuse Resistance Education, is similarly problematic. A mathematical review of 20 controlled studies showed no difference between the drug use of teens enrolled in the program and those who weren't enrolled. We should not be continuing to devote money to this program when studies have shown that DARE is a waste of resources, so I support ending DARE. I hope that my words, along with others here, have convinced you to continue to look into these problems, and I thank you for hosting this open forum.
Thank you, Anthony. Salim?
Hi. Yeah, thank you for having this forum. I'm so heartened to see that so many members of our community have showed up to this. I think it demonstrates that this is a real priority for the council, and I hope it continues to be a priority going forward. So I'm a Los Altos resident of 17 years. Some of our neighbors have voiced concerns with racial profiling and over-policing of Black and brown members of our community. And having grown up here, I've seen it firsthand multiple times. I vividly remember a time in middle school where my friends and I went to a movie night downtown Los Altos. And one of my friends called the cops on a kid who was wearing a hoodie because my friend thought that he looked suspicious. And like, at the time, that other kid was just minding his own business and trying to enjoy the movie night. But like, he still got hassled by the police and like asked if he had a weapon on him because his like hands were too deep into his hoodie pockets. And I know that like would not have happened if he was white or Asian, because it's never happened to me or my white or Asian friends when we're wearing hoodies. So, you know, what message are we sending to our kids when we allow incidences like this to happen? I mean, you know, it messes with your self-image if this is what you think your neighbors like view you as. And, you know, we need to let people know that they belong in this community. That, you know, that this isn't the sort of thing that we like accept. And I know this is just one story, but we've also heard other stories like this from our Black neighbors. And I know that this story does not like mean that the police mistreated this kid. I hope they treated him respectfully. I don't know because I didn't hear the conversation, but I'm telling the story because I think racial profiling is a problem in Los Altos as much as it is anywhere else. We're not special. We have the same history as other cities in the country, and we need to treat this with the urgency that other cities like San Francisco has. Right now, we don't even try to track how often profiling happens. As Chief Galea noted, we don't track data on false stops like the one I witnessed. There's uncertainty about the data that is published, but I can say with confidence that there's a very clear takeaway from the data. Black Los Altans are being over-policed. The best estimate is that Black Los Altans have a 9.61 times higher odds of being cited than, of being arrested than white Los Altans. But the true number could be feasibly as low as 2.5 times or as high as 26.5 times. So even with the uncertainty, the disparity is so large that even with a small sample size, it is highly statistically significant. And we might not know which causal mechanisms are most responsible for this disparity, but it's hard to say that there's zero contribution from how our police do their jobs. There are obviously ways that we can make improvements to mitigate this disparity. And, you know, I'm supportive of greater data transparency. I hope the Act AB 953 would cause that data to be publicly available online so members of the public can hold the police department accountable. I also hope that these numbers are brought up in performance reviews so that officers can make adjustments and learn from the mistakes they're making, or otherwise be fired if they're not making adjustments.
Thank you, Salim. Your 3 minutes is up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go now to some more Q&A. One is a comment. I am dismayed and disappointed to hear that Los Altos is not yet able to implement the RIPA of 2015. The law requires data collection by 2023, and we are targeting 2022 to comply with the law. This must be made much higher priority and implemented sooner. And next is a question, and actually I'm going to skip. There's two questions that are about the same thing. Let me read them first. Can you disclose how complaints and procedures are sustained, how they're sustained or not? And can you, then I'm skipping to another. Can you please explain what sustained means and who does the investigations? Investigations done by the Los Altos Police Department or external independent committee? I'm going to jump in on this, Chief, because I think you've answered it maybe a few times, but let me just, and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, I just want to kind of quickly go through it. All complaints of misconduct against police officers that are coming from the public or come in from within the department are investigated by the Internal Affairs Unit of the police department. The results of their investigations, they also make findings. And the finding of sustained means that there is misconduct. If it is not sustained, it means there's not enough to know whether or not there is misconduct. If it's exonerated, the officer is basically said not to have engaged in misconduct, and unfounded means that this thing never happened. It just never happened at all. Once Internal Affairs makes those findings, if they are sustained, that means the officer engaged in misconduct, then that would go to the chief, who has the decision about the nature of the discipline. Chief, is that okay?
That is perfect, Judge. Thank you. The only thing I will clarify, we're not large enough to have our own internal affairs division. We assign them internally. Thank you, though.
Got it. Thank you, Chief. So those are two. So I'm going to just skip to a question now, up in line. Current policy allows the controversial practice of firing on a moving car. Can you explain in detail when that would be appropriate? Chief?
Yeah, let me start off with, we discourage the use or firing a firearm at a moving vehicle. We train that way. It is in our policy. I know there has been a movement to prohibit it under all circumstances. And it's my feeling to come up with an absolute policy that our officers never will fire upon a moving vehicle under any circumstances. I think it's just unreasonable. I think there have been recent cases where vehicles have been used as deadly weapons, mowing through crowds and whatnot. And if that's the only alternative, I would like to have our officers to have that tool.
Okay. Next question, I'm going to take a few more from the Q&A. Do you also have comments about experiences with law enforcement coming from marginalized groups? Because we know that most white and/or privileged people have good experiences with the police. That can go to the chief or anyone who wants to answer. Do you have comments about experiences with law enforcement coming from marginalized groups? Okay, I'm going to go on. And one more from our Q&A. Has Los Altos Police Department considered officer and staff training in anti-racism? If not, I strongly consider such training.
Yes, we have considered, and we do training along those lines.
One more. What percentage of applicants get hired? Chief, I think you may have said it, but do you recall again the percentage?
It's low. It's very, very low.
Low meaning like below 10%?
I would say less than 10% of our applicants. I don't know what it is across the board, but it is very low.
Again, from Q&A, the state data collection law sets 2022 as a deadline. The collection could start sooner. If Los Altos prioritize this, how quickly could the chief institute it?
Yep, good question. I alluded to it earlier. We're already looking into it. There's a couple, we have two options. One is, and Judge, you had mentioned it earlier, I think there's like 16 points, 15 or 16 different
That's right.
points of data that we will be required to collect. We don't have the capacity, we don't have the ability to collect it and then report it. So we're looking at two options right now that we've already, as I work with the city manager and had conversations with him, to see if we can do this earlier. Our two options are to upgrade our existing CAD, which is our computer-aided dispatch system. We will need to do a significant software upgrade to that. The other options we're looking at is using a third-party vendor to add on to our existing CAD system and see how we can collect the data. But the work has already begun, and hopefully we'll have some progress in the short term.
Thank you. We'll go to our next three speakers. John?
So the next three speakers are Marissa, Jerome, and Bill.
All right, thank you. Marissa?
Hi.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Marissa Kingsley, and I'm a neighbor and a student who spends time in Los Altos. I'm a member of Showing Up for Racial Justice at Sacred Heart Community Service, and I'm speaking in support of Justice Vanguard. More specifically, I would like to talk about their demand to remove SROs from schools and reallocating it to mental health services. I would also like to support Suzanne's call to hire more certified therapists who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color in schools, as students often feel they don't have trusted resources to reach out to. Research has shown that Black students are disproportionately disciplined by police and do not feel safer at school with police presence. Recently, many other districts have cut ties, including Oakland Unified, Eastside Union, and Alum Rock Union. Thus, Mountain View, Los Altos School District should follow suit. It is imperative that all students are feel safe at school and that they're given the opportunity to thrive and be supported. Thank you for listening and hosting this open forum.
Thank you, Marissa. Jerome? Jerome, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Go right ahead, Jerome.
Oh, hi. I want to elaborate on comments that some people have touched on a little bit before. And I do sympathize with the comment that was made earlier that people in Los Altos want to feel safe and to make sure that our property is protected and things like that. I also want to say that people want to feel safe, and just having security for property doesn't necessarily engender security and safety for the people, especially if the belief is the way to protect the property is by oppressing those who represent various facets of society. And so I think about the police as an organization. And in general, police are trained really in two areas, what I call projectile launchers. They're trained to use, guns with bullets, rubber bullets, tasers, tear gas, whatever. And they're trained in incarceration. And that's where a lot of their primary training goes into, responding to threats and incarceration. I mean, I know that they get trained in other areas, but let's face it, police officers are not social scientists. So, in going back to the need to protect property, there are clearly times when you need to dispatch traditional police. And we've all seen them. I don't need to enumerate them.
Jerome, I'm having a problem. Jerome, we're having a problem. Jerome, hold on, Jerome. We're having a problem. I don't know if
police social
Jerome,
Yes,
I'm going to interrupt you. Can you hear me? Your Wi-Fi is going in and out, so we're having kind of trouble following you.
Oh, okay.
That's better.
Okay, I'll make sure I stand in one spot if it's better.
All right, and Jerome, you have another minute. Go right ahead.
Okay, well, I think there are already several paradigms for when you bring in experts to deal with certain situations. You have hostage negotiators, you have SWAT and things like that. I believe that there needs to be a similar service for dealing with social issues that are available 24/7, much in the same way the police officers are. And so I'd like to see resources directed to that type of service that could, that you don't have to wait for regular business hours, 8 to 5, that could be dispatched 24/7, so that when you're dealing with more social services, a parent dealing with a child, which could be under the influence of a substance, and their only two choices are getting the child incarcerated or the situation escalating. So I think when people talk about funds shifting, this is where they're talking about providing additional services so that police officers aren't called on to dispatch in areas where you don't require incarceration or a projectile launch.
Okay,
The only
Jerome,
other thing I'm
thank
gonna
you.
say-
Jerome, your 3 minutes are up. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jerome. We're going to go to Bill. Bill, you're next up. Are you there? Okay. If Bill comes in, John, you can let us. Is this Bill?
No, it looks like Bill is on mute. So Bill, if you
Okay.
can hear us, you need to unmute yourself.
Unmute. Okay.
Thank you, Bill. Go right ahead. You have 3 minutes. And welcome.
Okay. Sound check.
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Bill. Yes.
This meeting is being held as part of the national push to defund the police as the response to the tragic death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Calls to defund the police started popping up all around the country at around the same time, which leads to speculation that they are part of a coordinated anti-police effort. Some say that defund the police actually means reallocating or redirecting funding away from the police department to other government agencies. This is untrue. The New York Times on June 12, 2020 clarified that, quote, yes, we mean literally abolish the police, end quote. If that was not enough, New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said in a statement, quote, defunding police means defunding police. It does not mean budget tricks or funny math. It does not mean moving school police officers from the NYPD budget to the Department of Education budgets, the exact same police from in schools, she said, end quote. Let's stop this redirecting funding nonsense and address the real issue. Los Altos should not defund the police. The LAPD is not the Minneapolis Police Department, and they are not responsible for George Floyd's death. It is interesting to note calls to defund the police generally come from the left side of the political spectrum. These are the same people that used to tell us that, quote, private citizens do not need firearms because the police will protect them from crime. If Los Altos does away with the LAPD, people will look into arming themselves and crime will skyrocket. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to go to Q&A. One has been asked and answered. I'll just read it for folks. Who conducts investigations into officer misconduct? And that's come up now about 3 times. And again, the police investigate the complaints of misconduct. All right, the next one is a comment. Hello, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. My question is about documenting the reasons for arrests. Excuse me a second, I want to make sure I covered. No, I'm sorry, I skipped one. This is a comment. I find the Los Altos Police Department very effective. I needed them twice, and an officer responded quickly with a positive outcome. I hope we continue to have an environment that individuals want to become officers and feel respected by the community. This is not a question, but a positive comment. Next, hello, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. My question is about documenting the reasons for arrests. Police chief mentioned the reason for arrest could be dictated by the caller or by the decision of the officer, but it was not documented by the police department. Do you have an improvement plan to improve the quality of the information collected for more transparency?
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, but let me go back to the statement that I made earlier. The point that I was trying to make is sometimes arrests are initiated because of a call for service. And I think the example I gave was perhaps a shoplifter in custody or a domestic violence situation. as opposed to an officer driving down the street and self-initiating a stop on a vehicle or an individual and resulting in an arrest. That was the point that I was trying to make.
Thank you, Chief. And I'll take another Q&A here. And they're really coming in fast. Okay, so here it is. Bear with me a second here. All right, this is two questions in one from one person here about racial disparities. How do you explain the disproportionate number of citations and arrests of Black and Hispanic people? Compare the demographics of the stops in Santa Clara County. There are still higher percentage of stops of Black and Hispanic people. Second, your arrest data shows that Black people are more than 11%, but they are only 0.5% of the population in Los Altos. Actually, that's 0.4%, and a very small percentage of the peninsula overall. On the other hand, whites make up only 38% of arrests when they are more than 70% of Los Altos population and a large percentage of the peninsula. How can you account for this racial disparity in arrests? Anybody want to tackle that?
I had mentioned earlier, Judge, and I'll just reiterate it again. I think you can certainly draw some conclusions just by the numbers themselves. I think to really make or reach any substantive conclusions about any of the data, there needs to be a lot more research to be done. I know this is being done in a number of agencies. There's been conversations about agencies in Santa Clara County partnering with academic institutions to do some of the research.
And I'll take one more from the Q&A. This is just a comment and not a question. Greetings. First, thank you, Judge Cordell. It's truly an honor to have you moderating this meeting. I'm pleased with the national conversation giving attention to the vitally important topic of racial equity and protections within the context of public safety efforts and police behavior. As a resident of Los Altos, I am strongly in favor of maintaining full funding for the Los Altos Police. Public safety is one of my primary concerns and one I will be voting on in the next election. Thank you. And a question, where do you see racial bias playing into the police system in Los Altos? We all know it exists. Anybody want to tackle that? Okay, I'll take another question from Q&A, then we'll take our speakers. Did Los Altos Police support weakening AB 392 after the Stephon Clark shooting? What is your opinion on police unions trying to influence laws? Okay, no response. I'm going to go to our speakers. And John, can you tell me who is up next?
Yeah, so next we have Lazarus, followed by Corinna, and then Sophia.
All right, thank you. All right, Lazarus?
Hi, sorry, my name is Lucas.
Can you speak up a bit for us? We can't hear you too well. Can you increase the volume?
How about now? Can you hear me now?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
My name is Lucas. I've lived in Los Altos for pretty much my entire life, and I'm a person of color. Firstly, some people don't seem to understand what defunding the police really means. Defunding the police is short for the strategic allocation of resources. This doesn't mean taking all of their money. It means demilitarizing them and funding more helpful things such as social services, youth services, education, etc. Secondly, I would like to address the differences between model minorities and Black people, which people don't seem to understand either. When on the topic of racial bias and racism, you cannot throw Black people in the same group as model minorities. The two groups are largely treated unequally. It's a naive and frankly ridiculous view on the situation. Thirdly, Los Altos parents pass their prejudice on to their children. I see it in person as a student and on social media very frequently. Fourthly, I'd like to share the concern most of us students have. We see the police presence on high schools is to discipline students and not to provide a solution to the problem. Not to mention, as a non-white student, I feel intimidated seeing police on school, even though I'm not breaking the rules. My question to you all is, what are you doing specifically right now to address the bias in student resource officers in the Los Altos Police? We as students would like to see some of this student resource officer data. How are student resource officers helping Black and Latino students succeed and go to college? Black students have a very low college graduation rate coming from Los Altos High School. My parents, for example, would rather have the funding for student resource officers go to helping Black students get into and successfully through a four-year college than keep SROs on campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. If there's no comments, I'll take the next speaker, and that's Karina.
Hi, good evening. I'm Karina. Can you hear me?
Go right ahead, Karina. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Karina, and I am here in support of the Justice Vanguard's demands voiced tonight in regards to Los Altos policing. And I'm also here because Los Altos policing not only affects Los Altos residents, but also neighboring communities. For example, the number of Hispanic non-resident versus Hispanic residents arrested and cited is extremely alarming, and it reflects an implicit bias in how Los Altos polices certain groups. That statistic and this kind of treatment is not okay, especially in a city called Los Altos, especially with undocumented neighbors. This kind of racial profiling creates not only an unwelcoming, but extremely harmful and dangerous environment for all neighboring communities of color. And this is also the sentiment of my Los Altos friends who have had horrible and traumatic experiences with officers. They will continue to have these experiences, unfortunately, for the rest of their lives on the sole basis of their skin color. And I'd like to point out that one of the speakers earlier tonight, who was concerned about the destruction of property, didn't voice a concern for the lives lost and the lives at risk at the hands of biased officers, which goes to show where the priority of certain residents and how they see and how they utilize the police. The origins of policing, of slave catching and protection of property are still being perpetuated today. So I'm curious what efforts will be implemented in response to these complaints and demands for change, as opposed to the silencing and brushing off of these voices that is happening nationally and even in this meeting now. But whatever position you may hold, we need to know where you stand and who you are serving in order for us to respond and vote accordingly. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Karina. The next speaker is Sophia.
Oh, Sophia, yeah, that's good.
Hi, my name is Sophia.
Hi, Sophia. Can you speak up a little bit for us, please?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
That's much better. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name's Sophia. I am a resident of Los Altos, former LAHS student, and I'm working with JB too. I wanted to draw attention to a few things, especially mental health, but I'm going to draw in policing. Mental health hospitals and the carceral system complexes grew up together. They feed into each other, and I think it's important, especially to make a comment on having cops on campus, because by doing so, we're endangering Black lives in particular. While I'm a white person, while it might feel safe to some, I don't feel safe with it. And it definitely is not safe for someone in crisis to be detained in handcuffs to be transported to a hospital. There's a lack of funding as along the lines of defunding the police and reallocating funding. There is a lack going into community services. Mental health is underfunded. There's such a long wait list for, counselors on campus. There are other alternatives, like Suzanne mentioned, mobile crises. And that is much more helpful that I've found in my own experience, because I have been in a cop car twice on the way to a hospital, and cops don't know how to handle mental health crises. They just are not trained as mental health professionals, so it should not be an option. And it should also not be a respondent when the cops are called, when 911 is called and an ambulance is requested. The cops should not be showing up. And it is such a, you know, it's devastating to see. I've been in very intense situations, and there is someone, Soraya Reese, who was detained for a manic episode at the age of 13, who is still incarcerated. And, you know, like, just like the hospital does in the prison system, they are, you know, drugging, feeding patients, over medicating to the point where people are so fatigued and like so out of it that they cannot function. And she is 13.
Sophia,
Yes.
your 3 minutes are up.
I
and
have
thank
one more
you.
thing to add, and
Sure.
I thank you.
Sure. Mhm.
I want to pass this along. I want to say that it is sad that this was meant to be a night for the council to listen to us and the people, but Chief Galea has been given disproportionate time to read our data and defend himself and his department. And I mention this because, you know, the 3-minute rule, it's not enough time. We as a community, we would like to speak more. We would like you to hear our voices. We want to have that space. Encourage you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. I'll go now to some more Q&A. Longtime resident of Los Altos, and I would like to know if there is a training protocol that makes officers ask whether the person they approach is a resident or not. Chief?
No.
Next question. What percentage of Los Altos city budget goes to the police department? City manager, Chris, anyone know that?
Trying to recall right now of our operating budget. I believe it is about close to 30%, if I remember correctly.
All right. Next question. What is the proportion of arrests that are police initiated compared to active calls? How many active calls result in arrests? And in general, what is the nature of most active calls? Chief?
Yeah, it's a lot of information, but I don't have that data. I alluded to it earlier. Really have to do a significant amount of analysis to answer the question.
Next question. There are many paradigms that already exist for when dispatching the police is not the best response. How can we provide a better set of resources, especially through the emergency response services with current funding? So if you don't have immediate answers to the panelists, these are questions that, again, you all have. You will have these, and you know, they will, hopefully you will answer them or take them up in your discussions. And I'm going to read a few more. Completely disagree with the comment about shifting emergency calls away from the police to non-police professionals. Yes, other cities have adopted these types of programs, and we should review their data first. To my knowledge, there is no data to suggest that these programs work as intended. In Los Altos, let's make evidence-based decisions. Another Q&A. The data published doesn't address this, but I have long had a sense that the identities of those arrested for property crime, like burglary, are publicly identified, and that those arrested for other equally severe crimes, like driving under the influence. I speculate that those arrested for property crimes are perhaps more often people of color and non-residents than those arrested for other crimes. Can you speak to the policy for identifying and publicizing the identities of those arrested, and is that policy equitable? Chief, you have a quick comment on that?
Yeah, quick comment. Typically, we don't control the media. Typically, we are responding to media requests for information, whether it be residency, name, and things of that nature.
I'll take a couple more. When AB 953 takes effect in 2022, will our data be made publicly available online, or will it only be shared with the Attorney General?
Great question. I can't imagine a reason why we would not put it online.
Okay, and I'll read one more. There seems to be agreement, even from Chief Galea, that 911 calls for homeless, mental health, and other community issues could be handled by those with expertise in that area instead of armed police. This could reduce police work, and funds saved could be used to invest in mental health, housing, education, and the community. As a resident of Los Altos, I would like to see our city in the heart of innovative Silicon Valley try such an approach. All right, John, we're back to you for any more speakers.
Okay, next three will be, Reynetto, Sean, and Katie.
All right, first speaker, Reynetto, go right ahead. Go ahead.
Looks like that individual is on mute. So if you're Reynetto, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. Not yet. All right, why don't we go to Sean, and if Reynetto will unmute, then we can come back. Sean, can you go ahead, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having this important meeting, for your transparency in releasing this data, as well as for the engaging discussion. I have a brief comment. I'm a longtime citizen of Los Altos. I'm a professor at Stanford, and I work with data on a daily basis. My primary message is for us to take great care in interpreting this data and drawing conclusions. We want to base policy decisions on high quality data. Unfortunately, this is not high quality enough data for us to answer the question of whether people of color are being inappropriately targeted for citations or arrests. What we are missing are other information that could explain the reason for stop, citations, and arrests that go well beyond simply race alone. Recently, I've seen statistical analyses posted and comments made tonight showing that Los Altos residents who are Black or Hispanic are much more likely to be cited and or arrested than white citizens. I've gone through the data, and I'll tell you those analyses are correct. And if they were taken at face value, you would have to come to the conclusion that our Los Altos Police Department are discriminating against Black and Hispanic citizens. However, I want to provide you with some additional analyses of this data that is both accurate and shows that all is not what it appears to be. For instance, if you perform the same analyses and include those who are Asian citizens, you will find that you are twice as likely to be arrested as a white resident than if you are an Asian resident in Los Altos. Stated another way, if you're an Asian resident, you're half as likely to be arrested than if you're a white resident. The data is there for anyone to analyze for themselves. Now, nobody on this call believes that Asian residents are getting preferential treatment over every other race when it comes to arrests. It shouldn't pass anyone's sanity test. And therein lies the problem with the data. It is missing the very information that we need to better explain the full nature of the citations and the arrests than simply race alone. As such, I recommend great caution for all of us in drawing any conclusions or making policy decisions based on this data alone. Taking this data at face value would lead us to the wrong conclusions. These are important questions about race that we all have to address. And I recommend we work collectively to collect high quality data to better provide the answers that we all need. I want to thank Chief Galea and the Los Altos PD for their service to our community, as well as everyone on the call. Personally, I've listened and learned much from everyone, and it gives me great hope that we can work together collaboratively to improve our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. We're going to see if Reynetto, is she back now?
Hello?
Yes, if you can speak up a little bit, raise the volume a little, and you go right ahead and welcome.
Okay, my name is actually Janine Valadez. Reynetto is my wife.
I'm sorry. All right. So can you speak up even a little more? We're not having good volume here.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but it's not very, can you bring it up a little bit? If not, go right ahead. We can still hear.
I'll try to speak loudly.
That's better. That's much better right there. Go right ahead.
So I've been a Los Altos resident since 1989. I graduated from Stanford with a BSEE in 1981. And I want to speak today to two things. Hopefully I'll have time for both. The first is kind of anecdotal. I'm a Mexican American and I'm a homeowner since 1989. And in those 30 years, I have been stopped, never cited, stopped by Los Altos police officers 8 to 10 times. I didn't write them down, but I can recall most of them in my memory. And the reasons that I was given for those stops, of which about 4 of them, my young son, who's a graduate of Los Altos High and UC San Diego, and now actually works for Los Altos High. The reasons were as follows: 1 of 3. The most prevalent, usually when he was in the car, "Is this your car, ma'am?" Never asking for my license first, always saying, "Is this your car?" I drive a Lexus, the largest SUV. Or, "Are you a resident?" A couple times, but mostly no reason at all. After the question, I would be asked to give my driver's license, which I would. And then they would hand me my driver's license and walk away. It happened at daytime, it happened at nighttime, late at night. I'm an athlete and played a lot of post-collegiate athletics. And so I would often wear a hoodie because I was sweaty and cold, but not always. It got so bad that my son made me a Build-A-Bear when he was about 10, dressed up as a police officer with his own little voice chip that said, "Is this your car, ma'am?" And it was kind of a sad family joke. And my family who lives in Southern California would kind of make fun of me for living in Los Altos because I was always stopped. I was also often mistaken for my son's caregiver because he's whiter than I am. And in fact, Judge Cordell, you signed off on his co-parent same-sex adoption back in 1994, one of the first in California. So I have your autograph on his paperwork.
Wow.
And, you know, he's very aware. He grew up as an activist at Los Altos High School. He continued in college, and now he's working for Los Altos High School. My point is that stop data is clearly very important. Why did I never report these? Because the police had my license and they knew where I lived. And I frankly had fear that there might be repercussions to me. So I never once reported these stops. I've been approached very harshly in a cop car when my wife and I went to the opera in San Francisco. We were season ticket holders, and we dropped one of our cars at Almond School so that we could consolidate cars. And we were coming back, and I was getting into my car. Her car's a Mercedes. I was getting into my Lexus, and a Los Altos cop rushed the parking lot, putting the light on me, screeched to a stop, got out of the car, put the light in my face, and I said, "Excuse me, officer, is there a problem?" He said nothing to me. My wife came around the car. He saw her, she's Asian. He got in his car and screeched away. He literally laid rubber on the asphalt in the Almond parking lot. That was my most frightening experience with a Los Altos police officer. The last incident happened about maybe 18 months ago where I was stopped for no reason. So I have a very long history of uncomfortability in my own city, and I'm a volunteer at my son's schools. I try to attend some city council meetings when issues are important to me. I'm a homeowner, but I'm often either considered hired help, a dog walker. Oh, I've had 2 new puppies for 1 month. I've already been asked 3 times if those are my dogs, not by cops, by residents. So, you know, it's just kind of uncomfortable dealing with that reality in my own town, a town that I consider now mine. I've lived here longer than my hometown of Huntington Beach, California. So I just wanted to offer that anecdotal information. Thank you. I don't think I have time for my second topic.
Thank you. If we have time, you can come back in if you have a second issue you want to bring up.
I do, and it's a suggestion because my son's a senior deputy and detective in the Santa Barbara Police Sheriff Department, and I want to tell you what he's done in his community, a highly Hispanic community.
So let us get through. If you're willing to hang in there, shouldn't be too much longer, then we'll bring you back in. Thank you so much. So Katie, you're next.
Hi, hello to the City Council and to Chief Galea. Thank you guys so much for hosting this town hall. I had 4 questions and I'll just walk through them quickly. 2 are for Chief Galea and 2 are for the council. So one for Chief Galea, just to echo a lot of what other folks have said already, it appears that there's a disproportionate citation and arrest rate. And And even though the Stanford professor, Sean, who just spoke, highlights that there are other things that we need to understand about it, the disproportionate rate sort of speaks for itself. So I'm curious, what do you think can be done about this? So that's one question. The second question is for the council. So we've heard from a bunch of folks today, some folks who are in support of all the good work that the police department is doing, and some folks who are, oh, I'm sorry, let me start over. Question for the council. How do you decide how much of the budget should be allocated to the police? And how do you decide whether to reallocate funds to a police program that has already been funded previously, like DARE? I think Ishan had earlier noted that DARE has been shown to be ineffective and it seems like it's continued to be funded. Do you have a process for reevaluating things that have already been funded? So that's the second question. The third is for Chief Galea again. So this is the question that I had started asking before. Some folks are happy with the police department, others are not. It seems that knowledge and awareness of the current complaint registration system would be a barrier to members of the community providing feedback. It seems like fear of retaliation, as our last speaker just noted, would be a barrier. So I'm curious if you have ways of proactively seeking feedback from diverse members of the community. So not just going to DARE graduations and talking to admin and talking to school folks, but also talking to students, talking to teachers and other people who might not have as much of a voice. So that's the third. And then the last is question for the council. How is the council thinking about supporting Black lives in our community beyond the current focus of policing practices and policies? For example, increasing access to affordable housing. I know this is a town hall on policing, but I just wanted to ask whether there will be other initiatives besides just this focus on policing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. We'll go to the chief if you want to respond tonight to any of these. And the same thing for council, those here on the panel. If you want to respond, fine. Again, if you don't, the hope is you're going to discuss this and consider it as you move along in your work. So Chief, do you have any comments or response you want to make to Katie?
Yep. Yeah, to Katie, just one brief comment about the disproportionate rates. Yeah, I agree. If you just look at the numbers themselves, as I've mentioned before, it certainly raises a lot of questions. I'm hoping with the implementation of the RIPA data that we'll start collecting here, I think that will go a long way.
Any comments from anyone of the council who are represented on the panel?
Yes, I'd be happy to comment. This is Jan Pepper, the mayor. The first question for us was, how do we decide how much of the budget should be allocated to the police, and how can we change the budget? We are the ones who pass the budget, and we have the opportunity to ask for changes to the budget. So it's up to us to be able to do that. And that might be something that we will discuss as a result of this town hall. Many questions, many issues to discuss as a result of what we're hearing tonight. And then your second question about how are we thinking about supporting Black lives in our community? For example, increased access to affordable housing. Affordable housing is one of the key things that we have as one of our objectives this year. And we will continue to be looking at that and trying to encourage more affordable housing. So it's a tough question. I mean, it's a tough thing to solve in this very expensive environment, but we are trying to work on that and come up with creative ways of getting more affordable housing in this community.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to go now to Q&A that have come in. Mr. Jordan, the article says, this looks like, by the way, a comment and not a question, but I'm going to put it out. And Chris, if you want to respond, you can. Mr. Jordan, the article says you refused to read the 100-page document, but read the 2-page summary that included sustained allegations. The article says that to investigate this police chief, you hired 2 other police chiefs. Chris, it's not a question. Do you want to make any comment at all?
Let me just address the last piece, because I think I addressed the rest of it already. regarding hiring a police chief to investigate police department. In Oregon, quite frankly, you had to hire former police officers to investigate police. There simply was not a pool of private investigators who handled these types of investigations. And we used our employment law firm to try to actually identify people who could do that investigation. And as a matter of fact, one of the last things I did when I was in Oregon was trying to proactively recruit a former city manager without a police background to begin doing these investigations, because I recognized that that does not look good, but unfortunately it was the only way we could handle the situation.
Okay. Next, Q&A. Is there an oversight committee that reviews complaints against Los Altos police and reviews all of the police data for any bias? If not, how do we know there is not bias protecting a fellow officer? Is there a plan to create such an oversight? It does not make sense to me that someone who feels they have been abused or harmed would have to go to the abusive/harmful organization to file the complaint. Any response, Chief?
I can address a small portion of it. The oversight is, and it is correct, typically it's investigated or the complaint is made to the police department. There are times complaints go to other public entities such as the district attorney's office, but typically they come to us. If we feel that we don't have the capacity, it's a significant enough of a complaint to do the investigation, then we will hire outside individuals.
A few more Q&A. Not a question, but thank you for providing the opportunity to directly address the questions and concerns of our residents. Excellent moderation and thoughtful consideration. Another, I find it very concerning that neither the police chief nor the city council members know the basic breakdown of race in the city. Now, my understanding, the mayor gave us the racial breakdown. That's my recollection. Another, good morning, or good afternoon, should be evening. I know that a lot of you have seen the recently released police data and were overwhelmed by the amount of information and lack of analysis. I also know that many of you will see this data and trust that it encompasses the extent of the arrests made in Los Altos, but hundreds of instances of racial profiling are left out. Wherever a person of color, such as myself, gets harassed, targeted, followed, and terrorized by the police, those incidents are not reported as there is no arrest made or citation issued. The many times I was targeted as a 16-year-old, followed to work as an 18-year-old, criminalized as a Black man and child in Los Altos are not represented in the data. I urge you to listen to my words and those of other Black and brown members of our community. Understand why we have these demands and think about how you would feel if your child, sibling, or parent was treated in such a way to where even when we go exactly by the book, follow all the rules, and are upstanding citizens, we are still treated as less than. John, do we have any more speakers?
We do. The next three are Bennett, Lauren, and John.
Would you give me the names one more time, John, please?
Sure. Bennett, Lauren, and John.
Okay, thank you. And Bennett, go right ahead.
Hi, my name is Bennett Rosenberg. I'm a Los Altos High alum. And I come to you not with a question, but with an appeal for legitimate change. So I want to start with what we can't do. We cannot do nothing. I can talk at you today all I want, but at the end of the day, you, as our leaders, need to support and facilitate the hard work in reconstructing a broken system. We've elucidated today that Black people are several times more likely to be arrested, cited, or stopped by police. And looking at this one fact alone, I don't find this acceptable. And a multitude of other alarming facts that have been brought up today are unacceptable as well. I'm sure many of our residents don't find these acceptable either, as we've seen today. And I hope that as you reflect on today's town hall, you not only hear the positive feedback upholding the current system, but you also hear the Los Altos residents crying for change. We know the numbers, we know the stories, and we know the historical context in America. Los Altos is not unique. I would like to reiterate Karina's point that Los Altos needs to now think critically about what it values as a city. Historically, it has been slow to act, often choosing policies that I would consider regressive in the name of protecting things, including property and a small town feel. The question to be asking yourself as leaders during this time is, are we okay with this? We can keep protecting ourselves and legislate poor people, immigrants, and minorities away from us. And we could do what America has always done and criminalize people of color. Or we can choose to open up as a city and act as a socially responsible entity. I would love to see Los Altos do its part to fight systemic racism and xenophobia, and policing is a great place to start. Luckily, the information for how to solve the policing issues brought up today is out there. Luckier still, additional research is being done and additional policies are being proposed and setting a precedent for us. Many have been proposed on this very call. In my opinion, the path for Los Altos is clear. However, you, as leaders, have to be open-minded and accepting of a new mindset. Listening is the first step. Action is the next. This is not some fad. Racism persists. If you do nothing, we've lost. So thank you for your time today, and I'm excited to see some real changes in the near future.
Thank you, Bennett. Lauren, you're next.
Good evening. My name is Lauren Renaud. I'm a member of Showing Up for Racial Justice, and I'm speaking to support Justice Vanguard. I encourage you to reduce the scope of policing, quite simply. We have reached a point where police are a hammer and nearly everything looks like a nail, but police are a bad response to nearly all situations. Even residents calling in support of police have largely cited examples of either police officers not doing their job at all or doing a job that could be done differently, could be done better by a different agency or entity. We should not be responding to mental health crises with people with guns who can arrest people. That does not make anyone safer. We should not have police or SROs in schools. We should not address issues with students, kids really, with people with guns. Just as an example of misplaced priorities, the DARE program has been shown again and again to be ineffective, and yet just a few weeks ago, the Los Altos City Council voted in the new budget to not only continue the program, but expand it. Surveys have shown that the majority of Black students do not feel safer when police are present at their school. Everyone should feel safe at school, especially those most affected by police violence. We should be asking, what does safety for all really look like? I strongly encourage you to reconsider the scope of policing in Los Altos. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And John, you're next.
Yes. Hi. In listening to the discussion tonight, there seems to be an underlying assumption that there's a problem with the policing in Los Altos, and it's put forth by a very vocal minority of the population, in fact, that I think are from out of the area. We keep talking about the data of disproportionate results. When I look at the actual resident data, residents of Los Altos, 0.6% of arrests and 0.2% of citations were for the Black community versus I think it was roughly 0.3% of the population. I'm not speaking for non-residents, I'm just saying the resident data speaks for itself that it is not disproportionate. The second thing is, look at the data for the police. The data are overwhelmingly positive. 236 commendations, 9 complaints from the community, over 270,000 interactions, 9 complaints. If there was something systemic, you would have heard a lot more complaints a lot sooner. So I fail to understand the premise behind these arguments. I don't dispute people's individual circumstances and life experiences. I'm not disputing that. But I'm looking at the data overall and wondering where this is coming from. And third, there's a major movement right now, which has been alluded to before, about defunding the police across the country. My main concern is the police are exactly what we need right now. This is the last time in the world you would look at defunding or muting or disabling the police or undermining them. These people are heroic people who are not acknowledged for their work. And all of my interactions, yes, I've had a moving violation and they were completely polite to me. We've approached the police for help on a criminal item that they took care of, cleanly, friendly. So my main point is let's not undermine the police. Let's not demoralize the police, particularly when there's no data to substantiate the claims being made here. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm going to go to Q&A. Do the police take initiative to get feedback from the part of the community that may not be proactive or afraid of contacting the police? So I guess the question's about outreach, and do you do outreach to community, people of color? I don't know, but that's my guess of what they're getting at. Chief, do you want to say anything at all?
Yeah, I would say, we're a small community. I think our outreach, whether it be formal, informal, is ongoing. There's a number of programs that we do here that a lot of agencies do, but they're actually, I think, very effective in reaching the community. Our Coffee with the Cop, we have done programs to purchase or to do fundraising for backpacks or sweaters, things of that nature for some of our younger community members. We do a lot of online type presentations, and I think we're always looking for those opportunities.
Okay, second question here. There are only 6 complaints that were sustained. Tell us what the disciplinary actions were, for crying out loud.
Well, I don't have the data in front of me.
Next on the Q&A, how do you determine that a police officer or a prosecutor is doing a good job? Can this be gamed? No comment now. Chief, go ahead. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I can't speak for prosecutors, obviously, but I think how we evaluate our officers is really in a very, I think, broad area. Interaction with the community is one. Productivity, whatever shape and form that may take. And really, there's 5 or 6 areas that we try to continually evaluate our people in.
Going to go back to our speakers. John, do we have any speakers? And if so, the next 3?
Yep, the next 3 are Diane, Lillian, and Chuck.
Okay, thank you. Diane, you're up and welcome.
Thank you. I am Diane Glazer, and I've lived in Los Altos for more than 30 years now. And I'm also a leader in Bend the Arc, which is a progressive Jewish organization. So I do some activism too. And I already had the chance to speak directly to the chief, so I appreciate that. Here's some things I need to say, and that is, I've done a lot of bias training myself. I know the chief has mentioned that his department did bias training. My question is, how much do you do each year? Who gives it? Is it Lexipol, who's a private agency of former police officers, or is it specialists who really can bring your officers deeply into this issue? It's not a 1 hour or even a 5-hour commitment. And with all the stories we're getting about, if you've lived here long enough, you've seen it with your own eyes, that there are too many stops related to people of color. And there's, your Hispanic gardener is going to get, could be stopped for some small offense that someone else might not be. So I think we really need to look deeply at these things and not just say, well, the numbers say it or they don't. It is there. As another speaker said, we do have bias, okay? And let's be brave enough to figure out the solutions. And council, are you willing to pay for that, or shape the budget so that we can look? This is the moment that I think we need to look. And speaking of Lexipol, Chief, have we considered not using the Lexipol policy manual? They're a very non-transparent private company. I don't think they reflect what we're doing as a city or the police department, but they don't change the manuals quickly. I think they are being looked at by a lot of outsiders and saying they're not that great. So council, could we think about not using Lexipol? They're also expensive. Lastly, about the oversight by citizens. I know that there's been this one model promoted by Justice Vanguard, which is a very strong model. And there have been maybe some more low-key models, but council, where do we stand with that? And how would someone like me, who is interested get on that council or hear the reports of that council. I think it's crucial for change, and I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on that. That was a mouthful. I'm ready to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Does anyone want to respond at this point? Let me just put my 2 cents in that there is someone right here in our community who is the country's leading expert on policing and bias. She was a MacArthur genius 3 or 4 years ago, and that is Jennifer Eberhardt. She's African American. She is a social psychologist at Stanford on the faculty. So if you want to start somewhere, as Diane was mentioning, why not go to the best? And we have the best right here in the Bay Area. So I'm going to move on to, and again, Diane, we're not answering. This is all information that the council is going to be thinking about with regard to the manual that you brought up as well. The next is Lillian.
So Judge Cordell, looks like Lillian is also using an older version of Zoom. So Lillian, you'll be removed briefly from the meeting and then rejoined.
All right, so we'll go to Chuck. Chuck, can you come on now?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, who is this?
This is Lillian.
Oh, Lillian, you're here. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So go right ahead, Lillian. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Lillian. I lived in Los Altos for about 6 years. I graduated from Los Altos High School in 2014. And I don't work with Justice Vanguard, but I'd like to express my support for the policy proposals brought forth, particularly with regards to Los Altos' continuing presence on school campuses. As Chief Galea earlier responded to Yasha's question, he said his feedback on SROs have come primarily from administrators and parents, so people who are not the target of school policing. In response, I'd like to particularly highlight the testimony by Seth Donnelly, who was my teacher at one point many years ago, whose eyes on the ground as a teacher likely offer a more accurate picture of the environment that police on campus creates for students, particularly for students of color. Even in this very listening session, we've heard from students at Los Altos, students of color who do not feel safe and protected by police on campus. In fact, police actively have an intimidating presence. And I think, it is concerning to me that SRO's presence on campus is seen by the department as inherently positive without the department having meaningfully engaged with students actually on the issue. It's further concerning to me that this is true, given there's no data on campus arrests and citations, at least not that I've seen, data that would seemingly be the bare minimum that the police would need to have to substantiate police as permanent fixtures in public schools. And so my point here is that the police in schools not only subject vulnerable students to criminal punishment for behavior that would normally be handled internally by schools, but also interferes with student learning by establishing this environment where students feel like they fear being punished as criminals. And at this point, I would also like to recognize that we all need to recognize, and especially the police department, that even the presence of a single SRO on the campus is not isolated to the citations and arrests, and that their impact is not isolated to their activity as an individual. And because this all relates to racial profiling, right? Because when a police officer is on campus, it weaponizes known and unknown prejudices of teachers, administrators, and other students, and it just escalates these situations that would otherwise be handled internally by the school. And even though
your 3 minutes are up, can you wrap it up really quickly?
So I'll just ask my question, which is that I would like to know what Los Altos police have planned for SROs moving forward, and how open they truly are to fully removing police from school campuses in Los Altos. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Chief, do you have any comment you want to make at this time?
No, other than, I, along with city manager and the council, are certainly hearing the input, and we'll certainly take that into consideration moving forward.
And next up is Chuck. Are you there, Chuck? John,
Can you,
do we have?
yeah,
Chuck?
can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead, Chuck. Go right ahead.
Hi. I'd like to say thank you to the Los Altos Police Department. Both my wife and I have lived in Los Altos for the last 25 years. We were fortunate enough to move in here back in 1996, and it has been a dream come true. I mean, we moved in here to have children because of the school districts. Ultimately, we made the decision not to have children because neither one of us put our professional careers on hold to sit there and stay at home and raise our children. It has been a wonderful community. I've met a lot of good friends in the area here, and I believe and support in funding and continuing to fund the police department the way we have. And a couple of questions that I've got. The first one is, with all of the complex issues that have been raised by the people in the Justice Vanguard Foundation, how are we going to sit there and deal with all these complex issues with drug addiction, psychology, and dealing with all of the issues that are going on by defunding the police department? And two, wouldn't it make sense for increasing spending in the police department to bring in qualified law enforcement officers and give them the training that necessary that they need to do the job that is required in this issue? I do not envy the job that the police have right now. I feel horrible for them, but it's really the only thing keeping us going right now. I really do support the police department. Thank you very much, Chief Galea, and your officers, and please pass that on from my wife and I.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm going to go now to some Q&A. I appreciate the City of Los Altos Police Department providing the data. We need to be careful about drawing conclusions with inadequate data. Socioeconomic status, SES data, is missing, and by having that and better quality data, we could draw conclusions about what actions to take. As we look at the data, we note that the majority of police interactions are with non-residents. Hence, we need to consider one of the biggest, if not the biggest, predictors of criminal behavior, which is socioeconomic status. From a policy standpoint, if they had captured SES and accurately identified those with lower socioeconomic status were disproportionately being arrested, that may make you come to an entirely different conclusion about what you should do. It doesn't mean disband the Los Altos Police Department or defunding it. It means finding the causes and enacting solutions so that people in lower socioeconomic status have higher standards of living and less likely to commit crime. Instead, that means focusing on providing a more stable ends. That's about it. Now a question: what is the ultimate goal of this listening session? What will the follow-up be? And how do we proceed after this to ensure that people's voices were heard? In other words, what are the next steps? Mayor, do you want to tackle this at this time?
Sure. Thank you for the question. At our next City Council meeting, which will be held on August 25th, we will be following up and discussing what we heard tonight and coming up with some ideas of what the next steps should be. So we thank everyone for being so actively engaged tonight, for sharing so many ideas and sharing your insights. It's very, very helpful to us. So our next step is to take this all in and figure out what we should do next. One of the speakers made a comment that, I can find it, that, the next step, it's listening is the first step and action is the next. So we will take action. I hope that we will take action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Back to Q&A. This is a comment. The Los Altos Police Department are excellent officers, and I've had numerous positive interactions with them. They have conducted checks in my neighborhood at my request to make sure, no, I'll go back. They have conducted checks on my neighbor at my request to make sure she is okay. They have advised us on measures we could take to make our house more burglar-proof. They have advised our neighborhood regarding crime and safety measures. Every one of the officers I've met with, including when being stopped for a well-deserved traffic offense, have been professional. I think it's incredibly ironic for Justice Vanguard Foundation spokespersons to accuse our police officers of being racist. That kind of blanket accusation is shocking, coming from individuals who want to be treated as individuals. We should judge people on their individual merits, period. I hope we hear from more Los Altos residents so that the input gained from this town hall is not predominantly from Justice Vanguard. And one final one here I have, and again, it's a comment: positive social norms, abundant resources, high level of social cohesion, family support, and rewards for pro-social community involvement. This recommendation, of course, would need more accurate data on the individuals who are committing crime and infractions. Back to John. Do you have any more speakers?
We do. So next three will be Megan, Sasha Narain, and Samuel.
All right, thank you. Megan, go right ahead. Megan, are you there?
Yeah, hi there. Sorry.
That's
I just
all
think
right. Welcome.
Hi there. I'm a teacher at Los Altos High School, and I also work with Justice Vanguard. And I think it's really interesting that so many people seem to think that these are non-residents or people who are not in the community who have issues with the police. And it seems like we've only really heard from white residents and maybe some Asian residents who are really happy with how their property is protected in this area and don't really seem to care about the safety issues that Black and Indigenous and people of color feel in this community. I know as a teacher, SROs absolutely need to be off campus. That should be, something that's not even debated at this point in time in 2020 with what we're seeing. I just think that this is really a great moment where we can make residents of our community feel safe, and not just people feel safe in terms of their property, but feel safe in terms of their humanity and dignity as human beings. And these are just systems of oppression. I am a teacher. I'm a member of a racist institution as, a public school teacher. The police is a racist institution, and we can all take steps to change those institutions. I don't think there's been any name calling of specific police who are evil or anything like that. I have a great deal of respect for a lot of individual police officers, of course, just as I have a respect for a lot of individual teachers. But that does not mean that huge issues remain in these systems of oppression that need to be addressed in order to make the vast amount of inequality in our area lessened. So I just want to say thank you to the people of color who are speaking. And, I live in Mountain View, so yeah, I guess I'm not a homeowner in this area, so maybe my opinion doesn't matter according to a lot of the homeowners who've spoken. But my boyfriend is Black and has been over-policed in this area, has been followed by the police, has had community members call the police on him. So I don't personally even feel safe in this community as a white woman of privilege. So I think this is absolutely something that needs to be discussed and discussed with care. And I'd like to know, my question is, what is each of your position in terms of community control of the police and some kind of actual oversight and control over who gets to have a say over whether or not a police officer, has overreached and whether or not that person should no longer be on the force. I support these efforts in the school as well. I think impunity for teachers is unacceptable, just as I think impunity for police officers is unacceptable. So
Thank you, Megan. Your 3 minutes are up. Do you want to wrap up real quickly?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Next up, is it Sasha?
Yes, it is. And I hope everyone can hear me right now.
Absolutely. Go right ahead and welcome.
Thank you. My comment is regarding how LAPD interacts with households that are experiencing intimate partner or domestic violence. This is one of the many instances where a social worker can be instrumental in the aftermath of an incident, particularly in cases involving children. Someone with an understanding of child psychology and who can provide trauma-informed care would be better suited to communicate and develop a relationship with the affected household members than a standard police officer. It seems like current LAPD handling of domestic violence cases only diffuses a situation at that moment, but does nothing to address a larger pattern of violence that is occurring in that residence. Thorough documentation of the incident, as well as recording of household history, are needed to effectively track cases and follow up with households. There needs to be an extension of resources to help those in volatile situations. Lastly, I pose the question how we can further help these affected households to ensure their safety. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sasha. And next up is Samuel.
Hello, can people hear me?
Go right ahead, Samuel. Welcome.
All right, so first I would like to offer a rebuttal to what several people have said during this call today. So there's a sentiment that there's a vocal minority that comes from out of the area. The only person that comes from directly out of the area that I have heard in this call so far is someone that came from East Palo Alto, and they were trying to bring up a point that people from nearby areas are still affected by Los Altos policing. And if by vocal minority, you mean a minority that is finally being vocal about the disproportionate punishment from police that they are experiencing, then yes, you're correct that there is a vocal minority that is speaking during this call today. As a graduate of Los Altos High, I would like to bring up my experience and anecdotes of my experience with school resource officers. As a student of Los Altos High, I had many friends that were female students of color, and they would experience discrimination from the school resource officers in the form of being dress coded far more often than white female students. And this is a pattern that I noticed and I brought up with a friend of mine, and she affirmed that this is a pattern that is noticed by many female students of color at Los Altos High. This almost sexualization of female students of color in Los Altos High is particularly worrying for reasons that I hope I do not have to explain. And I hope that this anecdotal evidence, along with what many other people have said here today, will encourage you to remove student resource officers off campuses. And finally, I would like to bring up a particularly worrying trend that I've noticed throughout this call, and that is every time someone has brought up and asked for and has asked about racial bias reform, there have been no responses. This is particularly worrying because we have had throughout the nation a wave of people trying to create change and create racial bias reform in institutions such as the police departments. And the fact that there have been no responses from you all in this call today, despite it being a listening call, shows that there has not been much thought put toward these ideas of racial bias reform. So I hope that within a month's time, when the City Council meets again in August, the sentiment will not be, I hope change occurs, and instead will be, change will occur. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Samuel. I'm going to go to comments. This is a long one. It does appear that there are 120 Black people in Los Altos. Based on this data, 0.4% of 30,089. However, it may not be that simple in that Black alone is such a small percentage and could be included in the, quote, 2 or more races, unquote, which is 5.2% or an order of magnitude more. There is something missing here that doesn't make sense. It is likely in the racial categorization if either the citations/arrests or in the census data categorization did the census data. I don't understand it. Very tiny changes in the census data categorization around Black people would change the numbers significantly. Are there really only 120 citizens that identify as Black? And if you sampled those citizens, did 13.3% of them get cited for a traffic violation? We need to take great care when dealing with somewhat ambiguous data and small sample size. Second comment, some of the percentages that people have referenced are drawing off of 2 separate data sets, police data and census data. Because of such small sample sizes, small changes in assignment of race in either data set leads to wildly different findings. These are complex problems that people suggest to the police department. Why aren't we addressing more funding and support for the department to increase efforts in these areas? Increasing training and support for a great department is warranted. Next, thank you to the Los Altos Police Department. We respect and honor the work that you do with not much appreciation. And a question, does the council hypothetically have the authority to make our police department collect/report statistics on stops prior to 2022? I don't know if anyone wants to tackle that. And if you do not, it's there for you all to consider. And I'm going to go back to John. John, do we have other speakers?
We do. Our next three are Tony, Salim, and Maureen.
Hi, this is Tony.
Hi, Tony. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to, first of all, say, for some of the speakers I've heard tonight, I would love to recommend a couple of books to read. One is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo that I think might be helpful, just for some of the arguments that I'm hearing. So I'm the mom of 4 Black children who have grown up in Los Altos. My husband was born and raised here, so his family has been here for over, can you guys hear me? Hello?
We're here.
Okay. His family has been here for over 50 years, and we chose Los Altos as the place we wanted to raise our family. I believe that Keenan's statement was already read by Judge Cordell, but I wanted to say that my children have definitely been racially profiled in this city. I'm sorry. Keenan himself has been pulled over, not cited, but pulled over 15 times between the ages of 16 and 21. And my other son, Kai, as well, has been pulled over. And I want to just give a couple of examples of things that have happened to my children that have definitely had significant impact on their lives. So Keenan, at the age of 12, was at a friend's house, a white friend's house, about 4 white boys and Keenan playing tag and hide and seek. I guess they were being very loud, so a neighbor called the police. Keenan was the only child of those 5 children pulled out front and questioned. He happened to also be the only Black child. He has also been followed in Los Altos. Police have gone around the block several times when he's been parked in front of friend's house on University Avenue, waiting for friends to come out for them to go out. And I don't want to say that every police officer has implicit bias or racist tendencies or is prone to racially profile, but several of them obviously are and have done so. So I agree that we need to have the police trained. We need the police, and I commend the police for having this session, because I think by listening and hearing, this is how change is going to happen. The second and last thing I want to say is that I'm a physician and I work with students in a student health center. And I want to reiterate what some of the other speakers have said, which is that I have to call the police when I have a student who has stated that he or she wants to kill him or herself. And when I tell them that I have to call the police to put them on that 72-hour hold, that is when they break down, because they do not want to be taken in a police car to emergency psychiatric services. So that is a situation where money should be moved from the police departments to the mental health institutions that can help such individuals, instead of being something that the police handle. So people have said it's defunding the police. We do not want to get rid of the police. We need the police. We appreciate what they do to keep us safe. We also need to make sure that we're using our money in the best way to support everyone in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Next is Salim.
Hi, I was given the opportunity to speak earlier, so I'll be quick. Earlier, there was a Stanford professor who was expounding the value of being careful with data, which I totally agree with.
Salim, could you speak up a little more for us, please?
Yeah, can you hear me better now?
It's a little better, Okay. Yes.
So I was given the opportunity to speak earlier, so I'll be quick. From Earlier, there was a Stanford professor who was expounding the value of being careful with data, which I totally agree with. I looked into whether the data supports his claims, and I think his analysis is mistaken. There's no statistically significant difference between how often white Los Altans are arrested compared to Asian Los Altans. The same goes for citations. The p-values are 0.44 and 0.77 respectively, so it's not even close to significant. I assume the professor has to be referring to non-resident citations or arrests, but then it's obviously a mistake to compare this against Los Altos demographics. Non-residents, by definition, don't live in Los Altos. Thanks.
Thank you, Salim. And next is Maureen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Absolutely, and welcome.
Thank you. My name is Maureen Griffin. I'm a resident of Los Altos for 20 years, and our twin girls went through Los Altos schools K through 12, and they went through with Tony's children. So I have 4 questions, 2 of which I believe have been answered, but I want to know, number 1, who has taken notes and action items and the unanswered questions? Will this information be available online, and when can we expect it? And I heard from the city mayor that between now and your August city council meeting, you intend to handle these demands and requests. So are the 7 of you going to sequester away for the next 30 days and talk among yourselves? How are you going to collectively take all this valuable information, demands, and how are you going to distill it? And are you going to come back to us with a plan? And lastly, I want to be really, really clear on this one. I've been born and raised in Redwood City, California. I'm a native Californian. And I want to be really clear. I'm a white woman of privilege, and I expect reform, and I support Justice Vanguard.
Thank you, Maureen. Mayor, would you like to comment?
Yes, please. I did not say that we were going to figure this out in 30 days. I said that we will be holding our next city council meeting on August 25th. And at that meeting, hopefully we'll have the transcript of all of the questions and the comments that have been made tonight. I've been taking copious notes throughout tonight's town hall, and I imagine my fellow council members have been doing the same. And at that meeting, we will try to figure out what our next steps will be. So no, we will not have the answers in 30 days. That will be basically the start of us trying to decide what action we should take. Certainly we have received lots of suggestions tonight, and this will give us time for each of us to kind of noodle on those and think about those and come together and see what we can do first and what we can do, how we can make change as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to go now to.
Could I make one more comment
Sure.
too? Another written question was, does the council hypothetically have the authority to make our police department collect and report statistics on stops prior to 2022? And so I think we heard from the chief saying that there were some software upgrades that they needed for their officers to use in order to start collecting those statistics prior to that time. So I would say, yes, hypothetically, the council does have the authority to do that in terms of allocating funds to make that happen more quickly. And I'm sure that will be, one of many things that we talk about when we come together at our next council meeting on August 25th.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to go to the Q&A. Many citizens love our police and don't understand why 2% of the young citizens are so against our police. Question, can our council please do implicit bias training and mandate our school board to as well? Next, does Los Altos share license plate reader data or other data with ICE or databases that ICE has access to? Chief?
I don't believe so. I can double check, but I don't believe so.
Another question on a Q&A. Why is a complaint against Los Altos Police Department taken by LAPD? A person who feels harmed should be able to file a complaint in a place where they feel safe and free from bias. Is there a plan to change the current process? So this has been raised before, and again, this is lodged in another request kind of for independent oversight. And here is a comment. Please make sure that there are more frequent town halls so that the community can stay engaged and informed about the work being done and can also ask questions. Community engagement is important, and we need to make sure that all members of the community can feel heard. There should be continuous dialogue, not just when an incident happens. And I'm going to go to the next one is a question to me which has nothing to do with policing, and it's about why I fought against the recall of Judge Persky. This person wants to know why, and there is so much online. You can read about the campaign that we waged against the recall, so please take advantage of getting all that information there. Another comment, it is clear the council members have no interest in these issues. They count on the support of residents privileged by the current bias system and would not want to change anything. And a question, what are the next steps for the city council, the city manager, Chief Galea? What are your action items? What will you commit to for next steps? And the mayor just addressed that about what the council is going to do. I don't know if the chief, you want to say anything, if the city manager wants to say anything about action items or next steps.
I'll speak real quickly here. I've got copious notes, just so I know the mayor mentioned that. Also, there's some really interesting ideas and concepts that have been brought up to our attention tonight. And I know I'm going to be meeting with the chief and reviewing these, as well as with the council, and trying to come up with some plans on some of the ideas here that we can move forward as quickly as possible on.
Okay. There is I'm going to finish with another question up here. It's not a question, a comment. I do not agree with Sean. There is huge bias in this area that Asians are brilliant and successful. Why would we not believe they are less likely to be arrested than whites? Back to John. Do we have any more speakers?
We do. So we will have Ashley. And then, so Ashley appears to be the last speaker who has not had a chance to speak. And then we have a couple, the three who have previously spoken who have requested to speak. And so we will have Ashley, and then we'll have Maya, and then Janine.
And who is the fourth one?
The fourth one is Lillian.
All right, let's put Lillian right there. So we'll go right to 1 through 2, 3, and 4. And we'll start off with Ashley. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so my name's Ashley. I've lived in Los Altos for 8 years. I went to school here, and I'm speaking in support of Justice Vanguard. First, I'd like to thank the City Council and the police department for being open to public dialogue and transparency, and Judge Cordell for being with us today, of course. First, I'd like to have a couple responses to people's statements earlier. First, someone said that property theft has been increasing over the past few years, yet the data published by the Los Altos website shows that crime has not significantly increased. The perception of an increase in crime due to the proliferation of online conversations like Nextdoor is not equivalent to a real decrease in safety, and we shouldn't prioritize that over actual racial discrimination. And second of all, earlier someone said that residents want to feel safe and keep their property value up in Los Altos, which is achieved by an increase in police, but maybe the only people's safety that should be considered should just be richer white homeowners that make up the majority of the population here. So according to data released by the police department a couple weeks ago, or last week, the Los Altos Police Department arrests Black residents at 10 times the rate of white residents, and hands out citations to Black residents specifically at more than 4 times the rate of white residents. As noted by others earlier, this is a statistically significant disparity that's absolutely not acceptable and not able to be explained away by the number of calls that residents are making or whatever other excuses. And we can't just push back change until 2023 to make any sort of significant difference in our policing policy just because we refuse to believe that there's racism in our community. And that's absolutely not enough, and there needs to be substantial reform. So I know that a lot of people's first instinct towards policing reform is to jump towards band-aid solutions like implicit bias training, but that's not enough. There's been countless efforts across the nation to reform police with training and more regulation in the past 6 years since the first Black Lives Matter protests started. But as found by the National Initiative for Building Trust and Justice, there's no evidence that implicit bias training or community relations initiatives actually decrease police violence or bias. and it's really used more as a political cover rather than creating actual change. So please don't fall victim to passing political cover over enacting real change. We need to reimagine how policing functions in the city rather than being a one-size-fits-all solution. So for instance, as I'm echoing people's solutions earlier, like we should create alternate response units. As noted by Chief Galea in the Town Crier article, police officers are asked to do far more than they're equipped to do, like respond to mental health crises and homelessness and domestic violence issues, but increased interactions with the police can feel unsafe for a lot of people of color in our community and people with disabilities. So separate non-violent health services should respond to these types of calls, as has been used successfully in places like Eugene, Oregon, that are being tested in Portland, that are being used right now in Sweden, and have empirically saved money while doing so. So we demand reinvestment in these alternative response units. As the police chief has stated before, there are local mobile health services that desperately need funding, and there are a collection of cities that could fund this service together, as Mountain View and Los Altos already share several resources like a SWAT team. I don't have a perfect solution to this, obviously, but there are a lot of different areas in which this could happen.
You have 3 minutes are up. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'd just like to finish this with a quick question. I just want to ask, like, what is the path forward and how can civilians have these suggestions be created and actually implemented? Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley. And I believe the mayor and the city manager address what they are going to do next. And then it's on you, Ashley, and community to then, follow up with that. But they say they are going to, take it up starting with their next meeting. We next go to Maya.
Hi, thank you for the
What the fuck does that mean?
again. This is Maya Acharya again.
Hi, Maya.
I wanted to respond to some of the things that have come up about this perception of those of us speaking out in favor of moving towards justice as outsiders. I am a leader in Justice Vanguard, and I can tell you that we are a majority Los Altos resident group. And all of the folks who have spoken who do not live in Los Altos from our group tonight, which has been only a few people, have identified themselves as such. And my friend Gita, who's part of our group, who lives in East Palo Alto, spoke very well about why we included those people in this conversation. Gita just drops me off at home all the time, dropped me off the other day. She comes through Los Altos all the time to see me and her other friends here. I want her to feel, and her community to feel safe here because she is part of my community. And the reason that whenever I speak at these city council meetings, I always identify myself as someone who's lived in Los Altos my whole life, as a graduate of Los Altos High School and a graduate of Stanford, because I know that because I'm a person of color and I'm a queer person and I speak out on issues of justice, that Los Altos residents, especially white Los Altos residents, are going to try to discredit me and try to paint me as an outsider. But I have lived in this city in the same exact house for my entire life, except for when I was at Stanford and living on dorms. Los Altos was still my permanent address. And it really hurts me to hear people paint me as not as much of a Los Altos resident as other folks and discredit my opinion in that way. I also want to talk about a couple people who talked about, who used the term model minority to refer to Asian folks. I would really encourage you to look up model minority myths. The idea that Asian Americans are this kind of model minority is a tool of white supremacy that is used to first pretend that all Asian Americans are super successful, which erases Asian Americans who have more difficult lives. Perhaps they're refugees, they're low income, they're undocumented, whatever it is. A lot of these folks are refugees from the US started. And that is all. This model minority myth is used as a tool to position Asian Americans as a roadblock against demands for Black justice. And I want to make sure that I, as an Asian American, want to stand up and say that we're not going to let that happen this time around.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Next is Janine.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm back here. The anecdote I wanted to offer now is also personal. It has to do with my brother. He's my younger brother. He lives in Santa Barbara, and he is part of law enforcement and has been for many years. He, like most law enforcement personnel, are, underappreciated, highly overworked, underpaid. In his job, he has had to continue to hold multiple jobs within his role as a sheriff, deputy sheriff, including now he's a detective, but he still has to do patrol. He's involved with the hiring and vetting and qualifying of new personnel. He also took on the role as a community service officer because he felt very strongly as a Mexican American that community engagement was very critical. For those of you that aren't familiar with Santa Barbara, it's very much like Los Altos writ, a little bit more mature. It's a city that's very wealthy, but it has a large number of homeless. It might be Los Altos 30 years from now. They have issues of diversity. They have university and colleges in the town. They're dealing with gentrification, both in terms of displacement of the homes of people of color and also their small businesses by larger retailers and businesses. They have to deal with drastic income inequality. And so he has to deal with these issues every day, let alone law enforcement. And one of the programs that he instituted as a regular deputy is to take the Youth Police Academy and turn it on its head. Rather than just be a way to have young men primarily do cop stuff, he actually turned it into a very open community program to bring in women or girls, to bring in young boys and men, and to bring in community adults with a strong focus on diversity, to teach them what it's like to be a cop and to very actively and proactively and specifically engage them in concepts that were foreign, if not anathema, to existing systems of law enforcement, including de-escalation, conflict resolution, and simple communication. And he has been able to have now 3 academies covering almost 250 residents of all ages. And these people now, a lot of people of color, have become more understanding and educated about a different way to police. And now that feeds more strongly into the academy to actually develop both police officers and sheriffs. So I know that we're a small community, but we're part of a larger county. And I just hope that models such as this, where there's a greater focus on community engagement and an understanding that there are lots of jobs that we ask cops to do that they are not trained to do and they don't want to do, that have been mentioned throughout this meeting, that but the most important thing is starting to create a pipeline of both understanding and training with your community so that you have a larger pool of well-cultured candidates for hiring as police officers. You know, the police
3 minutes.
mentioned this, that it's hard to find good cops.
Janine, your 3 minutes are up. Can you wrap up quickly, or are you done?
That was it. Is that I think
right.
Feeding a pipeline is very important.
Thank you. Now we go to Lillian. Lillian.
Hi, yes. Is audio okay?
Yeah, you're doing fine. Go right ahead, Lillian.
Great, thank you so much. I have a comment and it's followed by 2 questions. And so, I mean, I would just like to reiterate again, I don't work with Justice Vanguard, but I did live in Los Altos. My parents live in Los Altos right now. I'm only away for school. And I wanted to reiterate one of their policy points, which was to demand that Los Altos declare itself a sanctuary city and to implement meaningful, actually binding policies that forbid local police from working with federal immigration authorities. And I know that 3 students at Mountain View High School were ordered to deport the country literally just this January 2020, even though like 3 years ago, the Mountain View City Council decided not to adopt laws that would establish a greater divide between local and federal police. And so I wanted to make that point known. I didn't know that had happened until earlier today when I researched it. So I wanted to ask my first question being what, I know earlier Chief Galea said that he would look into what the LAPD is doing with ICE, whether they share databases. And so I would like to ask if you do find that there is information or any level of collaboration going on, whether or not the police department is ready to to break any of those commitments, whether or not they're ready to commit to refusing any and all collaboration with federal immigration authorities, particularly when it comes to vulnerable undocumented students. So that's my first question. And the second question is just reiteration of the first time speaking, which is at this point, what are the police department's plans on SROs for LAUSD campuses, and whether or not they are truly open to removing SROs from all Los Altos campuses sometime within the foreseeable future? Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Chief, do you want to make any comment? And if not, we'll take
Really
Q&A.
quickly.
Go right ahead.
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you, Judge. Certainly, I think I'm open, city manager and council are open to the discussion about the future of SROs. No decision has been made and probably won't be made tonight, but certainly we'll have to start the conversation. Immigration, we do not enforce laws. We don't cooperate with the immigration directly.
So I'm going to go back to Q&A. Here's a comment. I am a PhD student doing data science at Stanford. I can say without a shred of doubt that the data provided, as well as the qualitative data provided tonight, are indeed sufficient to demonstrate that policing in Los Altos is racist. Speaking as an Asian American, it is shameful for a white man to abuse the age-old myth of Asian, quote, model minority, unquote, to suggest that the racial disparities in citations and arrests are due to anything other than racism and other structural inequities and inequalities. Next comment. As an Asian American, I know people are less likely to call the police on me than a Black or brown person because of how they perceive me. This perception of suspiciousness may not be entirely the fault of the police, but it is the responsibility of the police to understand racism among the community that will affect who community members call the cops on. Another, do you have a systematic way of proactively seeking feedback from diverse members of the community? And I assume you all will take that as a suggestion. Next, why do you think these are non-residents? Almost every person who was critical of police said they are residents. Black and Latinx people do not feel the power to make formal complaints. White dude, please listen to Blacks, Latinx, and people of color. Okay. Next, California criminal cops, who they are, what they did, why some are still working. This was on the front page of the Mercury News. How do you avoid hiring these cops? Chief, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the article. I'll certainly take a look at it, but as I mentioned early on in the conversation, we do very thorough backgrounds. I could not envision ever even remotely considering hiring someone who is convicted of a crime or fired from another police agency for misconduct.
Next, do you support the formation of an independent community control board that has power to participate in firing and seeking charges of police for criminal conduct? I will give that again as it's come up earlier, and about how some people in the community want you all to consider that and forming such a board. Next comment. This is regarding comments made by other residents who have completely ignored the statistical fact of arrests and citations disproportionately target Black and Latinx members. Community members of Los Altos have spoken on behalf of members who are violently discriminated against. We are not a minority. There is a strong majority of folks fighting for police defunding, removal of police on campus, and fund reallocation and support the demands of Justice Vanguard. Don't get it twisted. There is an overwhelming amount of Los Altons who are fighting against police terror, as well as neighboring residents who have every right to speak in this city hall. I would highly suggest that the members who spoke against these sentiments to remove themselves from their ivory towers and actually listen to Black and brown experiences. Protect Black folk and undocumented residents. John, do we have more people who want to speak?
We do. So we will have Erna, and then Ishan and Samuel.
Okay, hello.
All right, go right ahead. Erna. Go ahead, Erna. Okay, if
demand of creating a community power. Can you hear me?
yeah, you're going in and out, so let's start again. Go right ahead.
Okay, for sure. I'm a resident of Los Altos. I'm a graduate of Los Altos High School, and I'm a student at UCLA. I'm also a member of Justice Vanguard. I want to briefly reinforce Justice Vanguard's demand of creating a community power board that comprised of queer folks and people of color, because this implementation will be a huge step towards both listening to the community and having the community help make real and justified decisions for the city we live in. I'm glad that there are those in Los Altos who feel protected by the police, but we need to turn our attention to the ones that don't feel safe by the police. Specifically,
So we've lost her, and if she comes back in, John, we can get her back in the queue. And let's go to, I think was it Esther?
Ishan.
Ishan, I'm sorry, I can't read my own writing. Ishan,
No
go right
worries.
ahead.
So I just want to address something that a lot of residents have called in about, saying that we need the police in this town in order to prevent this sort of dystopian nightmare where crime is running free in Los Altos. Again, I just want to reiterate, time and time again, you can read many books, many studies that support the fact that an area is not low crime because the police are there at every moment fighting crime. The reason an area is low crime is because, for one, employment is high. When employment is high, that means that people do not have to turn to crime in order to provide for their families. So when employment is high, crime is low. Employment is very high in a wealthy town like Los Altos. When home ownership is high, crime is low. In Los Altos, home ownership is very high. So I really want to, fight against this idea that we need more police in order to keep crime low in Los Altos. Crime will remain low in Los Altos so long as the area remains wealthy and everybody remains well employed. And the second thing, I want to ask Chief Galea directly if he would potentially be in favor of citizens or concerned citizens being at the table during union negotiations between police unions in the city.
I am not aware of that model being done. I think it's an interesting question, but I don't have any personal experience in it, and I'm not sure what labor issues there might be with that. So I'm really probably not the right person to ask.
Thank you, Ishan. And can we go next? Is Erna back in the queue?
Yes, I am back. Can you hear me?
Let's try it again.
Okay, let's try it again. I'll just start in the middle. I want to briefly reinforce our Justice Vanguard's demand of creating a community power board that comprises of queer folks and people of color. This will be a huge step towards listening to the community and help having the community make real and justified decisions for the city we live in. I'm glad that there are those in Los Altos who feel protected by the police, but we need to listen to and turn our attention to the ones that don't feel safe by the police in our community, specifically in our schools. As said so by many members of the call today, the presence of police on campus is oppressive to Black students and students of color. Justice Vanguard conducted a new survey and filmed testimonials of Los Altos high school students and teachers, which showed that police officers do not make students of color feel safe, or teachers of colors. This in turn creates an oppressive and unhealthy environment in a place meant for learning. It is the responsibility of the city of Los Altos to ensure that every single student feels safe at their school and in their community. We cannot ignore the voices of the press. Instead of police officers, there should be on-site mental health professionals to aid students in need. To just summarize, Los Altos City must remove police off campus to ensure that our students and teachers feel safe. So my question to the panelists is, how will the Los Altos City Police respond to the oppressed voices of the community? Thank you.
Thank you, Erna. And we're going to go to Samuel next.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Go right ahead, Samuel.
All right. Based on comments that I have heard from the panelists today, I am worried that substantive change will not come for several months, if not more. In response to this, I wish to read a quote from the Black author James Baldwin from The Price of the Ticket. To quote, "I was born here almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time. It has taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brothers and sisters' time, my nieces and my nephews' time. How much time do you want for your progress?" End quote. It is unfair to minorities and to those that are hurt most by the disproportionate policing that we have seen in the statistics and the anecdotes today to wait for substantive change. In a month's time, I hope to see more talk of change and less talk of talking about change. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Samuel. I'm getting a sense, though, that our speakers are starting to get repetitive. So what I'm going to do is read the comments I have here. And unless someone has something new to add to the discussion, I think we're going to bring the town hall to a close. We've been going for 2.5 hours. So let me take up these comments.
Judge Cordell?
Yes.
Sorry, this is John. I do have 2 individuals who have not yet spoken.
Great. Okay. So let
me
do this. Let me read these comments, get to them, and then we can wrap this up. All right. These are the final comments. First one. This is regarding comments made by other residents who have completely ignored. Let me see if I didn't read this before. Yes, I already read that. Let me just make sure. I'm just. Yes. All right. So this is it. How will more cops help with treating drug addiction? Are police medical professionals or mental health professionals that understand the causes and treatments for drug addiction? Next, during my time at Los Altos High School, our school resource officer was Katie Krause. I have never heard of a negative experience while she served as the SRO. She continues to provide excellent service as a captain of the Los Altos Police Department. Next, I'd like to note that Chief Galea has only served as the Chief of Police since December 2016. That is a relatively short time. We need to recognize that change takes time, and I'm confident that Chief Galea is committed to ensuring that Los Altos has the best police department. Next, 2 people made a comment about Asians being 2 times more likely to be arrested if you're white in Los Altos. Based on the numbers I see, it does appear that if you are Asian, you are 1.97 times more likely to be arrested than if you're white. And this is for residents of Los Altos. There does not appear to be any data between white and Asian residents in getting cited. Next, I urge the council to not defund the police. Whatever deficiencies the department may have regarding profiling, racial or otherwise, should be dealt with by more training, more data collection, but certainly not by defunding. Also, I emphatically disagree with comments denigrating the protection of property. I have been a resident of the city for over 30 years. I have never had a problem with the police. I have no expertise regarding SROs. I presume they were hired for a reason. Next, this does not deal with policing, but I'm going to read it. What happened to the beautiful Black Lives Matter art in Lincoln Park? Is it going to be displayed in a location in Los Altos? Another question, are we moving forward with allowing a Black Lives Matter mural in downtown Los Altos? Next, per a January 27 Facebook post by the police department, one officer made 162 arrests in 2019, which is 28% of all arrests outlined in the report. That officer is an officer of color. I've had many interactions with him, and he has always been incredibly professional and kind. Next comment. I, as a white woman of privilege and resident of Los Altos, feel uncomfortable hearing how students and people of color are treated in this community. I support the demands of Justice Vanguard, specifically the demand of a community control board. This is an opportunity to rethink the role of the police and to change the current broken system. I hope the mayor, city manager, and council members are taking this seriously and act soon and not wait until 2023. Otherwise, they will be unsuccessful. That will conclude all of the comments, the questions in the Q&A. That is the last one. And John, if you will tell me who our final speakers are.
So we have Jill and Ludka.
Great. So Jill, go right ahead.
Can you
Go
hear me?
ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, Jill, go right ahead. And
Okay.
welcome.
Thank you. So I just have a couple of stories. My son and our nanny were pulled over on one day going to the park. She had a pretty bad looking old car, and this is the only time anyone that we know has been pulled over by Los Altos police. It had out-of-state plates. So, you know, our son was really upset about this. And we knew she was only driving 28 miles an hour in a 25 zone, and we knew she was pulled over because she didn't really belong in Los Altos in her crappy car. The only other person I know who's been ticketed in Los Altos is a man who does drives a big truck and he dumps dirt. And he was coming to do work in our neighborhood, and he was going down Cuesta in a truck that was very big and violating the truck route. Even though he had a permit to do the work, he said, I don't have the time to take the whole afternoon off to go to court to fight this. And so he just paid the $300 ticket or whatever it was. But I mean, these are just the kind of stories. I've seen multiple people of color having their vehicles searched in Los Altos. I've never once seen a white or an Asian person having their car searched. And I certainly have never gotten a ticket in the 17 years I've lived here in Los Altos. I'm a white person. I support what Justice Vanguard is asking for. I also believe we need police, but I strongly believe that things need to change. We need to review data. And from what I have read, I've done quite a bit of research and been looking into reforming police. And I do believe that bias cannot be trained out of a person. So I really feel like this is something that is going to take a lot of work. And specifically, I'm also hoping that we can do some sort of education in the school system as well, because there is a lot of stuff going on in social media with our kids and a lot of racist activity happening there as well. And I think what the police do is just reinforcing these racist behaviors in the school community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. And before we go to Ludka, I'm going to ask Trevor to stop the Q&A because we're going to wrap it up. There are two comments that came in. So I'm just going to read those quickly, and then we're going to go to Ludka, who's going to be our final speaker. So next comment was in the Q&A, the calls for bold and dramatic action. The calls for bold and dramatic action are not helpful. The actions need to be proportional to the urgency and size of the problem. First, one would need to prove there's systemic racial profiling by the Los Altos Police Department. The data we have does not suggest that. And the final comment, what is the council member's position on a community control board with the hiring and firing power of police officers? So that's going to be our last in the Q&A. Trevor, you can stop that. And I believe that question has been put already, this final question. And again, there have been no response because they're going to be discussing all of this at some point in their meetings. So we're going to finish the town hall with Ludka. Go right ahead.
Hello?
Yes, Ludka, go right ahead and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making this town hall happen. My name is Ludka. I'm a resident of Los Altos Hills. I still think that the Hills people have some say in what's happening in Los Altos. Hopefully you see the point. I'm an educator. I'm a wife of an African-American man. I'm a mom to a black toddler boy. Forgive me if my note is not completely coherent. I was writing it while the baby was crying. I'm here with an informal group of adults from Los Altos and Los Altos Hills. We call ourselves, I think, Reimagining Community and Safety. And I also would like to express support to Justice Vanguard and say I wholly agree with their and other people's call to remove school resource officers from schools and to cancel police department contracts with schools on their end. To end there and reallocate that money into mental health resources. I also support the suggestion to establish a community control board, not review board, but control board, with power to fire and lead investigation into officers, along with opportunity to contribute to the upcoming contract negotiations with the police union. I also strongly believe we should establish a program like Cahoots and divert some percent of the calls to them. Supposedly, it could save us up to, I don't know, 10 to 15% of the current police budget, which could be used better. I would like to remind the residents who have great experiences with the police, who might also often have some that might also often have something to do with their whiteness or their privilege. Let's not please dismiss the experiences of marginalized people just because your experiences have been good. I'm also supporting the calls for having more data and more transparency about the nature of the stops and arrests, where those stops take place, the racial breakdown, the age, and resident, non-resident data. And I urge you to get the same data for, collect the same data for SROs. We also need to establish ourselves as a sanctuary city. And if the homeowners are so worried about property and crime, and most of our stops are for of non-residents, I believe it is then our responsibility to help our neighboring towns. I also wish the City Council and Police Department made their websites much more transparent.
Judge Cordell, looks like we lost Luca.
Okay, all right. We're going to conclude our town hall meeting, and I'm just going to make just a final closing remarks and hand it back to the mayor. So I thank everyone for participating. John or Trevor, can you tell us how many people actually tuned in for this town hall meeting?
The highest that I saw was about 160 attendees.
That's amazing. So with 160 attendees, and by my count, we had 49 speakers. There were about 4 or 5 who were repeat, but that's amazing as well. So I thank the people who participated, who tuned in for this, and the city leaders for participating in this town hall meeting. Let me just conclude with this. Last week, I interviewed for the Commonwealth Club, David Gergen, and he's a political pundit for CNN. And he and I are in very different political parts of the spectrum. I mean, he's a moderate, he's rather conservative, and I'm on the other opposite end. And we still had a very good discussion. And I bring this up because in 2000, he authored a best-selling book called Eyewitness to Power, in which he offered 7 vital elements that our leaders must possess. And 2 of those really struck out for me. One of them was this: a central, compelling purpose rooted in moral values, and 2, a passion that inspires others to carry on the mission. So to the residents of Los Altos, insist that your city leaders' actions be rooted in what is right and what is good. And to the city leaders, ensure that what you do inspires others. I am ever hopeful in this moment in our country that this moment will make us stronger, will make us kinder, and after November 3rd, will bring all of us closer. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this town hall with you. Back to the mayor.
And Judge Cordell, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. It's great to witness someone who has such great facilitation skills, and it is so helpful, and we really appreciate your perspective. I also want to thank all of the 160 plus attendees who came tonight to this town hall, whether to listen, to speak, or to pose questions in writing. We appreciate your engagement in our community. We all want to make this the best place it can be that treats everyone fairly and with humanity. And the City Council's next meeting will be on Tuesday, August 25th. And at that time, we will get together to discuss what has happened tonight and determine what follow-up action we can take. Hopefully we can come up with some things that we can take action on quickly and others may take more time, but we want to keep this momentum going. All of our discussions are in public. We are a public council. There are no backroom conversations or deals that are made. Everything is done in the public setting. So you're welcome to come to our meeting on August 25th. That will start at 7 p.m. Likely continue to be virtual as this one. And thank you so much for your ideas, your suggestions, and clearly your heartfelt concern for our community, which I think all of us share. So thank you so much, and hope everyone stays safe, washes their hands, wears their masks, and stays healthy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.